Millionaire takes his mistress to a luxury dinner, but when he looks across the room, he freezes. His ex-wife is there, and she's with a powerful CEO. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Donald Delacroix stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment on the Upper West Side, gazing out at the shimmering Manhattan skyline. Though it was early evening, the city bustled below with a hypnotic pulse that usually filled him with pride. Yet tonight he felt a slight tug of uncertainty. Tall and broad-shouldered at 47, Donald maintained a strict workout routine that had sculpted his athletic frame. His blue eyes, typically sharp and assured, flickered with an unspoken tension. Behind him, Patricia Delgado, his girlfriend of the past year, set her purse on the sleek marble countertop. She was 31, with blonde hair that fell in carefully styled waves down her back and bright green eyes that sparkled with a designer's creativity. Her business as an interior decorator was on the rise, largely helped by Donald's connections, but she claimed to value his presence more than his influence. Even so, he knew she had been angling for more commitment. Tonight, however, was meant to be a celebration of success. Donald had just signed a multi-million-dollar deal to expand his boutique hotel chain in Midtown. The final negotiations had stretched over months, culminating in a whirlwind of phone calls and contract revisions. He should have been thrilled. Instead, he sensed a lingering heaviness that he couldn't quite name. "Donald!" Patricia called softly. She approached, careful not to disturb him while he was in his usual moment of reflection. "Are you all right? You've been quiet since the call from your attorney." He turned and offered a half smile. "It's done, Patricia. The deal is signed. That should mean we celebrate." Patricia's eyes lit up, an unspoken question lingering there. "That's wonderful news. We should go somewhere special, just you and me. Someplace we can toast to the future, maybe discuss us." She let that final word dangle, hoping Donald would pick it up and carry the conversation forward. The truth was that Patricia wanted to talk about their relationship, possibly about moving in together or even an engagement. But Donald sidestepped her intentions, something he'd done many times. "I already made a reservation for us at Le Bernardin," he replied, picking up his jacket from a nearby chair. "Thought we could enjoy a quiet dinner in style." Her smile turned radiant. "Le Bernardin? That's fantastic, Donald. Fantastic." "Thank you." Although Patricia was clearly thrilled, a shadow passed over Donald's features when he said, "We'll leave in 10 minutes." She registered his shift in mood, but chose not to press, hoping that by the time they arrived at the renowned restaurant, his celebratory spirit would return. Donald headed to his office to shut down his laptop. The city lights stretched out behind him like an endless sea of possibilities, a view he had grown accustomed to ever since he purchased this penthouse after his divorce. He glanced at his reflection in the dark screen, remembering how he had felt when he first moved in, unstoppable, on the verge of conquering New York's luxury hotel market. Now, 2 years later, he had indeed carved out a successful business empire, but some quiet voice told him that not everything was in place. He checked for messages from his mother, a woman he rarely visited in her retirement home in Connecticut. None. He hadn't expected any. They hadn't spoken in over a month, not out of anger but out of sheer distance he allowed to remain. His younger brother, a school teacher in Boston, had tried to reach out to him last week, and Donald still hadn't found time to return the call. He scrolled through a few more unread emails before heading back out. Patricia was ready, wearing an elegant black dress that accentuated her slim figure. She beamed at him, her eyes full of anticipation. As they walked out into the private elevator, Donald mustered a convincing smile. He noticed a flicker of relief on Patricia's face. She needed reassurance. He knew that. During the short ride to the restaurant, Patricia chatted about color palettes and new interior design trends, occasionally weaving in remarks about how they might redecorate his place together. Donald listened politely, inserting murmurs of agreement, yet his mind drifted. He thought about how, once upon a time, he had shared that kind of excitement about home projects with someone else. Her name was Christine. He frowned slightly, pushing the recollection aside. By the time their driver pulled up in front of Le Bernardin, Donald forced himself to focus on the evening. A line of sleek black cars waited as valets rushed to meet arriving guests. Patricia stepped out first, gracefully accepting Donald's hand for balance. With her on his arm, he walked into the softly lit lobby of the restaurant. The hostess greeted them warmly, praising Donald's recent hotel acquisition. He responded with polite gratitude, grateful for once that the talk of business might distract him from the odd sense of disquiet. Moments later, they were led through the quiet murmurs of other diners, all elegantly dressed, to a table with a view of Central Park. Donald inhaled, trying to let the refined ambiance soothe his nerves. Patricia reached across the table to rest her hand on his. "Here's to your success," she said, smiling earnestly. As Donald lifted his glass of champagne, he tried to ignore the unease in his gut. He took a sip, forcing himself to smile back at Patricia. Internally, a question lingered. Why didn't victory feel the way it was supposed to? Donald's eyes drifted around the softly lit interior of Le Bernardin, where polished silverware gleamed under chandeliers and hushed conversations filled the elegant space. This restaurant, typically a haven of comfort for him, felt strangely claustrophobic tonight. He noticed Patricia's inquisitive gaze and realized he had been tapping his fingers on the crisp tablecloth. "Is everything all right?" she asked gently, leaning forward. The candlelight illuminated her face, revealing genuine concern. He nodded, exhaling slowly. "I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind, I suppose." The server appeared, handing them menus. Patricia began discussing the various seafood specialties, while Donald opened his menu as if searching for something, though he wasn't sure if it was the right entree or a release from his own tension. He couldn't remember the last time he felt so ill at ease in a place meant for celebration. He studied the room. Around them, couples exchanged discreet laughter, and business associates clinked glasses over closed deals. The scent of butter and fresh herbs mingled in the air. Usually, Donald thrived in upscale environments like this, places that reflected his status. But at that moment, the subtle perfume of success seemed to choke him. Patricia placed her menu down. "I think I'll try the roasted halibut," she announced, attempting a warm tone. "How about you?" "The lobster might be a good choice." He glanced at her but felt distant, as if watching from another room. "Yes, maybe the lobster." He closed his menu abruptly, thankful that he hadn't been asked to elaborate on his mood. Patricia, noticing his detachment, decided to steer the conversation in a lighter direction. "You know," she began softly, "I was talking to my friend Catherine today. She said there might be a great opportunity for me to design a new lounge in one of your hotels. It could be a perfect collaboration. My style complements your brand." Donald's jaw tightened involuntarily. He recognized how his name and influence often opened doors for Patricia. He didn't exactly mind helping her, but it added a layer of business entanglement he wasn't fully comfortable with, especially given her push for something more permanent between them. He put on a polite smile. "That's good news. I'm sure we can discuss it with the management team. Let me know if you have specific design concepts in mind." She brightened momentarily, but a flicker of disappointment passed over her features when he kept the topic strictly professional. "We'll talk," she answered, eyes lowered. Donald caught himself slipping into old habits, compartmentalizing emotions, controlling the situation by limiting personal entanglements. He took a long sip of water, determined to regain some composure. A waiter returned, confirming their orders. Once alone again, Patricia placed a hand lightly on his. "Donald, I want this night to be special for us. We haven't truly celebrated your new deal. You worked so hard for it." He nodded, aware that her words came from kindness. "I know, and I appreciate it. I guess my mind is still spinning from all the negotiations. I'm just tired." Her expression softened. "I understand," she said gently, though her eyes asked for more. "After dinner, maybe we can walk for a bit in Central Park, get some fresh air." He agreed with a shallow nod. Yet, an unsettling feeling that something was about to break hovered over him like a storm cloud. The sensation was so strong that he found himself glancing toward the entrance of the restaurant every time the door swung open. Patricia followed his line of sight. "Are you expecting someone?" Donald shook his head, forcing a brief laugh. "Not at all. Just paranoid, I guess. I keep thinking one of my associates might show up to talk business." She chuckled softly. "Well, if they do, I'll guard you from any dull contract talk tonight." He appreciated her attempt at humor, though it didn't alleviate the sense that a quiet disruption was circling them. The two clinked their wine glasses, and Donald tried to focus on the moment. When their meals arrived, the aromatic dishes were plated to perfection. Patricia admired the delicate garnish on her halibut, snapping a quick photo for her personal gallery of design inspirations. Donald, however, merely stared at his lobster for a second, hardly tasting the first bite. His mind felt elsewhere, drawn to a tension he couldn't name. From a neighboring table, he caught parts of a conversation about recent real estate acquisitions in the city. Usually, that topic would spark his interest, but tonight he couldn't bring himself to engage. Patricia glanced at him, silently noting his detachment. A sudden clatter came from a few tables away. Someone had accidentally knocked over a wine glass, causing it to shatter. Donald's heart jumped inexplicably at the sound, as if it tore through the polished veneer of the evening. It wasn't a significant incident, merely a small accident, yet it seemed like a sign that the fragile calm might be on the verge of cracking for him too. He refocused on Patricia, who gave him a sympathetic smile. She reached across the table to hold his hand in a reassuring gesture. Donald squeezed back, trying to ground himself in the moment. Despite his best efforts, an undercurrent of unease lingered, hinting that no matter how carefully planned this night had been, something irreversible was about to unfold. The half-lit interior of the restaurant stirred old memories Donald had worked hard to suppress. He couldn't pinpoint what triggered them, perhaps the refined atmosphere or a certain way the candlelight caught Patricia's hair. But something tugged at him, drawing him back to a time he had buried. He heard fragments of a memory. Christine's voice criticizing him for being too absorbed in his career, her frustration rising over late-night meetings and missed anniversaries. 2 years had passed since he walked out of their shared apartment, suitcase in hand, resolved to chase success at any cost. He shifted in his seat, trying to detach from the recollection. Yet it lingered, producing an unsettling mixture of guilt and regret. Across the table, Patricia chatted about a recent meeting with a design client, but her words were a gentle hum against the echoing thoughts in Donald's head. He glanced down at his phone, noticing missed calls and unread messages piling up. One was from his attorney, Leonard Krauss, who had negotiated the final terms of his big contract. Another was from a hotel supplier requesting urgent sign-offs. Even on what was meant to be a celebratory night, business still pressed on him. Patricia's voice registered again. "Donald, are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern coloring her tone. She had stopped speaking about her work, noticing his distraction. He breathed out slowly. "Yes, sorry. I'm just thinking about something that happened earlier." You know how it is when you finalize a contract. There's always some loose end. She reached for her water glass. We can talk about it if you'd like, or we can talk about something totally different, whatever helps. He paused, weighing whether to reveal the memories floating in his mind, but it felt too personal. His divorce from Christine was something he and Patricia rarely discussed, except in broad terms. "No, it's fine," he said, managing a tight smile. "I don't want to bore you with all those details." Patricia nodded, though the slight downturn in her lips suggested disappointment. She wasn't prying, but she wanted to be there for him, and Donald wasn't opening up. Their conversation lulled, replaced by the hum of hushed voices at nearby tables. Donald found himself transfixed by a young couple seated in a corner booth. The woman wore a simple gold ring on her left hand. They leaned close to each other, occasionally laughing as if sharing a private world. He felt an odd pang in his chest, recalling how he and Christine had once been that couple, full of inside jokes and stolen glances. He set down his fork and stared at the pristine tablecloth. Thoughts of Christine drifted back and unbidden, her furrowed brow when he would check his phone during a rare date night, the sorrow in her eyes when he missed yet another family gathering. Her final plea for him to at least slow down, to remember that life was more than profit margins and corporate expansions. "Donald," Patricia ventured gently, noticing his vacant stare. "Are you sure you're all right?" "I'm fine," he replied almost automatically. Then, catching the doubt in her gaze, he added, "It's just old stuff. Ghosts from the past. I'll deal with it." Patricia squeezed his hand gently. "You know, you don't have to deal with everything alone." He mustered a quiet nod. Her hand was warm in his, reminding him that he had someone who cared for him now. But the pang in his chest refused to subside. Just then, Donald's phone buzzed again, its screen lighting up on the table. Without checking who was calling, he slid it into his jacket pocket, determined not to let business intrude any further. He turned to Patricia. "Look, I'm sorry if I'm ruining our evening. You've been looking forward to this." She smiled sympathetically. "It's not ruined. I'm just concerned. Maybe after dinner we can go somewhere else, or even just head back early if you prefer. We can talk or we can watch a movie, whatever you need." He appreciated her offer, yet his mind flickered again to Christine. He remembered that he used to promise similar evenings of quiet solace to his ex-wife, only to break them for a crucial conference call or to catch a last-minute flight. The wave of guilt that washed over him was almost overwhelming. A new thought formed. Had he changed at all, or was he still the same man who put business above everything else? He tried to shake it off. His success was undeniable, and Patricia seemed happy with the life he provided, at least most of the time. But that small voice inside him whispered that success could be hollow if he continued to repeat old mistakes. He forced himself to refocus on the present, leaning into the conversation with Patricia about a potential trip to Lake Tahoe. She described the lodges and the scenic views, painting a picture of tranquility. Donald realized it was exactly the kind of break he hadn't taken in years, and the idea soothed him momentarily. Still, in the background of his mind, the specter of Christine and his past failings lingered. He feared a confrontation with his history, a confrontation he'd been avoiding since the divorce. Moments after the plates were cleared away, Donald excused himself from the table, citing the need to wash his hands. In truth, he craved a few minutes to steady his nerves. As he navigated through the dimly lit hallway toward the restrooms, the soft notes of an overhead piano melody drifted after him. The restroom was elegantly decorated, dark marble sinks, golden fixtures, and a mirror framed in ornate silver. Donald splashed cold water on his face, careful not to soak the starched cuffs of his tailored suit. He stared at his reflection, his blue eyes catching the subdued lighting. For years, that reflection signified unstoppable ambition, the man who had broken free from a modest upbringing to become a prominent name in New York's luxury hotel scene. But now, he questioned what that ambition had truly cost him. The divorce from Christine loomed in his memories. He had let her go, convinced that leaving the marriage was necessary for his next level of success. She had been supportive, but never enough to compete with his drive, or so he had thought at the time. He inhaled sharply, trying to regain a calm exterior. Stepping away from the mirror, he recalled how his attorney, Leonard Krauss, used to say, "You can't outrun your regrets forever, Don." Leonard had played more than just a legal role in his life. He was something of a mentor, always ready with steadying advice. Yet Donald had brushed off that wisdom more than once. Re-entering the hallway, Donald passed a quiet lounge area where a small group of diners sipped after-dinner cocktails. He overheard snippets of conversation, someone praising a new hotel in Midtown, another discussing real estate trends. These topics usually ignited Donald's competitive edge. Tonight, he felt only numbness. Returning to the main dining room, he noticed that the buzz of conversation and the clink of silverware seemed a bit louder, or perhaps he was simply more attuned to his surroundings. As he approached their table, he caught a glimpse of Patricia scrolling through her phone. She wore a concerned expression that vanished the moment she spotted him. "Hey," she said softly, slipping her phone into her purse. "All good?" He offered a quick nod and sat down. A waiter approached with dessert menus, but Patricia waved them off. "We're fine, thank you," she told the waiter, her tone polite but firm. Clearly, she sensed Donald's restlessness. They sat in an uneasy silence for a moment. Finally, Donald cleared his throat. "I might need to check on a few things before we head out," he mumbled, referring to his work messages. It felt like an excuse even as the words left his mouth. Patricia's lips curved into a small frown. "If you have to, sure. But Donald, if something's weighing on you, I'd rather you talk to me about it. I'm not just here for the celebrations." He appreciated her willingness to listen, yet he couldn't bring himself to unravel the tangled knot of his feelings right then. Instead, he said, "I promise I'll explain everything later. Let's just finish up here." She nodded, though the tightness around her eyes revealed her lingering worry. Donald forced a quick smile, lifting his glass for a final sip of champagne. The celebratory meal felt more like an ordeal he was eager to escape. As Patricia paid the bill, something she insisted on as a gesture of pride in her own financial independence, Donald found himself scanning the restaurant once more. He didn't know why, but he felt like he was bracing for a collision. It was the kind of instinct that had guided his business decisions all these years, an acute awareness that something was off. He locked eyes momentarily with a couple across the room. They looked away, uninterested, but it made him realize he was on edge. Patricia reached for his hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. On their way out, they passed a tall vase of white lilies near the reception desk, the floral scent momentarily distracting Donald from his anxious thoughts. Outside, the city lights glowed with an almost theatrical brilliance. Patricia suggested they linger on the sidewalk, as it was a mild night for late autumn. Donald shoved his hands in his coat pockets, taking in the swirl of traffic and the hum of conversation from pedestrians. He stared at the shimmering lights reflecting off the windows of the skyscrapers lining the street. Typically, he would admire this view like a conqueror surveying his kingdom. Tonight, it felt ominous. Patricia turned to him, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Do you want to walk in the park for a bit? Or would you rather head home?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of the unresolved tension. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. A quick glance told him it was Leonard. He ignored the call, stashing the phone away. Patricia noticed, but said nothing, perhaps trying to be patient. Donald exhaled as a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of nearby trees. The sense of an approaching storm lingered, though the night sky looked clear. He wondered if it was a storm that raged only inside his own mind. As they started walking, Patricia looped her arm through his. She pointed to the entrance of Central Park, just across the street. "Let's just go in for a few minutes." "I need to clear my head too," Donald nodded, though he felt uncertain about whether the gentle darkness of the park would calm him or make him brood even more. Part of him dreaded the silence, where more memories of his past marriage might surface. Still, he followed her lead, stepping into the park with the faint rustle of leaves underfoot. 15 minutes later, Donald and Patricia re-entered Le Bernardin, not to dine again, but because Patricia had left her purse on the table in the rush to leave. Donald wished they could have avoided returning, but Patricia's embarrassment was evident, and she apologized repeatedly for the oversight. They made their way through the lobby, scanning the room for their vacant table. As Patricia hurried to retrieve her forgotten purse, Donald let his gaze wander. The restaurant had quieted slightly, with fewer diners than before. The waitstaff moved gracefully, resetting tables with folded napkins and fresh candles. That was when he saw her. Christine. She was seated near a corner window with a man Donald instantly recognized, Edward Winters, the 52-year-old CEO of a global hotel chain. His sharp features and confident posture matched the reputation that preceded him. But it wasn't Edward's presence alone that rattled Donald. It was Christine's radiant smile, the same one that had once belonged exclusively to Donald in what felt like another lifetime. Donald's breath caught in his throat. He stood transfixed, gripped by a torrent of recollections. The day he and Christine had moved to the city with lofty ambitions, the evenings they spent dreaming of success, the arguments that escalated until there was nothing left but an icy separation. Patricia returned, purse in hand, and halted when she noticed Donald's rigid posture. Her gaze followed his line of sight. "Donald," she murmured, "are you okay?" But he couldn't respond. Christine looked radiant, her light brown hair flowing around her shoulders, subtle highlights catching the ambient light. The confident tilt of her chin suggested she was comfortable in this upscale setting. Donald had never doubted her elegance, but tonight she seemed even more composed, as though she'd found the fulfillment that once eluded her. He observed Edward leaning in, whispering something into Christine's ear. She laughed softly, placing her hand briefly on his arm. In that simple gesture, Donald recognized an intimacy that cut deeper than he had expected. Then his gaze dropped to Christine's left hand, a single glittering band, an engagement ring. Donald's heart pounded. Over the past 2 years, he had sometimes imagined Christine moving on, but he never truly pictured her engaged, or with another man at all. And certainly not with Edward, someone who had recently approached Donald about a potentially groundbreaking business partnership. Christine, as though sensing eyes upon her, glanced up. For a fleeting moment, Donald thought she might react with anger or surprise. Instead, their gazes locked in silent acknowledgement. He noticed no hostility in her expression, just a calm awareness. She raised her brows slightly in recognition, and a faint, polite smile curved her lips. Patricia touched Donald's elbow, concern lacing her voice. "Donald, let's go. You look pale. What's going on?" Donald swallowed hard. His mind scrambled. A swirling blend of regret, jealousy, and shock pressed in on him. He finally turned away, muttering, "That's Christine, my ex-wife." Patricia followed his gaze again, her eyes widening. "Oh, I didn't realize—" Before she could finish, Christine rose from her chair. She was leaving with Edward. and they were heading toward the exit on the opposite side of the restaurant. Donald watched every step she took, noting how poised she seemed. He recalled the last time he saw her post-divorce. She was hurt, uncertain, and bitter. This woman looked unburdened and genuinely happy. Patricia looked at Donald, her face filled with questions she didn't yet dare to ask. "That's Edward Winters, right?" she said softly. "The man who wants to partner with you." Donald nodded, unable to pull his gaze away. "Yes, the same." They stood like that for several seconds, the world around them seeming to slow. Donald felt raw confusion, as if someone had swapped all the pieces of his life and now they no longer fit. Patricia gently slipped her hand into his, offering silent support. When Christine and Edward finally disappeared out of sight, Donald exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. A wave of emotions surged within him, a potent mix of pride, longing, and regret. It dawned on him that he had spent the last 2 years chasing an ideal of success he once thought was the key to his happiness. Yet, here was the woman he once loved, apparently finding her own path to happiness without him. Patricia, sensing his turmoil, didn't speak. She simply gave his hand a reassuring squeeze and guided him toward the exit. Donald followed, still reeling from what he'd witnessed. As they stepped out onto the sidewalk again, the city lights seemed harsher, the noise of passing cabs too loud. He couldn't ignore the reality. Christine, his ex-wife, had clearly moved on and was now engaged to a man whose presence would likely remain intertwined with Donald's professional aspirations. He glanced at Patricia, who looked back at him with guarded concern. Inside, the quiet questions began. What if everything he'd sacrificed for success had cost him more than he could ever regain? What if, in the pursuit of building empires, he had lost the only person who truly understood him? Donald stepped out of the taxi into the crisp morning air, his breath forming faint clouds against the bright sky. He had arranged to meet Leonard Krauss, his longtime attorney and advisor, at a discreet cafe a few blocks away from his office in Midtown. After the shocking encounter with Christine the previous evening, Donald had barely slept. Patricia had tried to comfort him, but he mostly lay awake, haunted by Christine's calm smile, that engagement ring, and the unsettling realization that Edward Winters now played a role in her life, and possibly in Donald's own business ventures. The cafe was quiet, with only a handful of patrons sipping coffee at small wooden tables. Leonard, a tall man in his early 60s with silver-streaked hair and a perpetually kind expression, raised his hand in greeting when he spotted Donald. He was dressed in a modest charcoal suit, his tie slightly askew, as though he had rushed to get there on time. "Don," Leonard said warmly, offering a firm handshake. "Grab a seat." "It's good to see you, although you sound tense on the phone." Donald settled into the chair across from him. "I appreciate you meeting me so early. I've got a full schedule, but this can't wait." Leonard nodded, signaling a waiter. "Coffee or something stronger?" "Coffee's fine," Donald replied. He tried to relax against the chair, but found his shoulders stiff, as if bracing for impact. Once they both had steaming cups in front of them, Leonard leaned forward. "All right, spill. You sounded unlike yourself, and that's saying something, considering I've seen you through countless negotiations, some of which nearly gave me ulcers." Donald exhaled, absently stirring his coffee. "I saw Christine last night at Le Bernardin. She was with Edward Winters." Leonard's eyebrows rose. "Winters, as in the CEO who's been courting your partnership." Donald nodded. "And they're engaged." He paused, choosing his words with difficulty. "I don't know why it shocked me so much, but I feel like I can't stop thinking about it." Leonard took a careful sip of coffee. "I can imagine that's not easy to process. How'd Christine seem?" Donald shrugged. "Happy, more serene than I've ever seen her, which, I guess, is good for her. But it rattled me. Leonard studied Donald for a moment. Are you reconsidering the partnership with Winters because of this personal connection? It's not just the partnership, Donald admitted, lowering his voice. It's everything. I can't shake off this feeling that I made a huge mistake leaving Christine behind, or that I squandered something I didn't even know how to value. Leonard set his cup down. I won't pretend to be a marriage counselor. But as your friend and legal advisor, I can tell you, unresolved feelings can bleed into your business decisions, whether you like it or not. You need clarity. Donald let out a dry laugh. Clarity. Right. All I feel right now is regret and confusion about what it means for me going forward, both personally and professionally. Patricia's already anxious about my reaction. She has no idea how deep this goes. Leonard leaned back, folding his arms. Maybe it's time to face the parts of your past you've been running from. I know you'd rather keep personal matters locked away, but that approach doesn't seem to be working anymore. Donald grimaced. I can't just roll up to Christine and demand she talk about our past. She's engaged, for God's sake. True, Leonard allowed, but if you're entering into a major deal with Edward, you might cross paths with her more often than you think. Better to be prepared emotionally, so you don't sabotage yourself or your relationship with Patricia. A heavy silence fell over them. Donald glanced out the window at pedestrians rushing by, each with their own destinations and private anxieties. He suddenly felt envious of their straightforward routines. So, Leonard continued gently, what do you plan to do? Donald sighed. I have no clue. But I can't keep ignoring this. He hesitated, recalling the countless times Leonard had been a steadfast figure in his life. I need you to guide me through the business side. But personally, Leonard offered a knowing smile. You've got to handle the personal side, Don. I can't fix that for you, but I can advise you to think carefully before you burn any bridges or sign any dotted lines. Maybe that means an honest conversation with Christine. Maybe it means reevaluating what you truly want with Patricia. Donald nodded, feeling the weight of those words. You're right. I hate to say it, but you're right. They spent the next half hour delving into the legal complexities of the upcoming partnership with Edward. Leonard reminded Donald to carefully draft clauses that would protect his brand identity and ensure his hotels retained a degree of independence. It was typical corporate talk, but overshadowed by a new emotional backdrop. When they finally parted, Leonard patted Donald's shoulder. Listen, I know you. You're smart and you're tough, but sometimes you ignore your heart until it screams at you. Try not to let it get that far this time. Donald offered a wan half smile, slipping on his overcoat. Thanks, Leonard. I'll keep you updated. As he walked away from the cafe, Donald realized that Leonard had done more than just offer legal advice. He had gently nudged Donald toward a path that might force him to confront old wounds. The thought both frightened and oddly relieved him. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he might need something beyond deals and contracts to fill the growing void in his life. 2 days later, Donald found himself pacing his penthouse, uncertain whether to make a call that felt both necessary and impossible. In the living room, Patricia sat quietly, flipping through a design magazine. She had given Donald a wide berth since their tense dinner at Le Bernardin, sensing that something far deeper was troubling him. The sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the modern decor that Patricia had helped curate. Neutral tones and minimalist furniture offset by splashes of color from contemporary art pieces. Usually, Donald took pride in the sleek environment that matched his status. Today, the penthouse felt sterile, almost suffocating. Patricia closed her magazine and looked up. "Are you all right?" she asked for the 4th time that morning. Her voice was gentle, but laced with concern. Donald halted mid-pace. "I need to reach out to Edward Winters." He extended an invitation to meet again, before finalizing the partnership. "It's about the merger specifics, but also—" He paused, reluctant to mention Christine's name. Patricia studied him, her green eyes reflecting a tinge of sadness. "I understand," she said quietly. "You have to do what you have to do." He offered a brief, grateful nod. Picking up his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found Edward's number. A momentary hesitation. Could he truly face the reality of Christine's new life through the lens of a business alliance? The memory of her serene smile still clung to him. But Donald squared his shoulders. He had built an empire by taking bold actions. Personal trepidation wouldn't stop him now. The call went through, and Edward's polished, confident voice answered. "Donald Delacroix, good to hear from you." "Edward," Donald replied, summoning a calm tone, "I'd like to take you up on that offer to meet again. I have some ideas about the branding strategy for the joint venture." "Wonderful. Name the time and place." They agreed on a formal lunch meeting at a private club in Midtown the following day. As Donald ended the call, Patricia rose from the couch. "That's good, right?" she asked carefully. "Moving forward with the deal," he ran a hand over his clean-shaven jaw. "It's not just about the deal, it's maybe a way to see how everything will fit together, including Christine." Patricia nodded, her expression unreadable. "I want you to know," she began, voice gentle, "I'm not pressuring you to share everything with me, but this situation, running into Christine, has obviously shaken you. I can't help feeling like maybe there's a piece of you still over there, in the past." Donald's gaze dropped. He wished he could deny it convincingly, but something held him back. "There are loose ends," he acknowledged. "But I'm still here, Patricia. I haven't gone anywhere." She studied him as though trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. "All right," she finally said. "But just be honest if you need some space, or if you need me." He gave her hand a quick squeeze, grateful that she was at least trying to understand. Deep down, he suspected she wanted more assurance about their future. But he was hardly in a position to offer promises when his own mind felt torn. That afternoon, Donald left for his office, intending to bury himself in work. Yet the usual refuge of spreadsheets and project proposals no longer brought the relief he once found in them. Though he managed to discuss important matters with his team, like expansions in Soho and updates to the boutique property in Chelsea, his thoughts drifted. Midway through a meeting, Mary Thompson, his 50-year-old director of human resources, caught his eye. She had always been perceptive. After the meeting, she pulled him aside. "You seem preoccupied," Mary said softly. "Is everything all right?" Donald hesitated. Mary wasn't just an employee, she'd become something of a confidant. Her warm demeanor contrasted sharply with the high-pressure environment Donald typically inhabited. "It's personal stuff," he admitted. "Nothing that should affect business." Mary gave him a knowing look. "Sometimes personal stuff does affect business. You can only separate them for so long." He considered her words. "I guess you're right. It's just complicated. Let's leave it at that for now." With a gentle nod, Mary let the subject drop, but Donald felt the hint of compassion in her gaze, and it stirred a pang of vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to feel. By late evening, Donald found himself alone in his office, long after most employees had gone. He stared at the city skyline through the tinted windows, recalling the nights he used to stay just as late, telling Christine he'd be home soon, only to show up hours later. A lump rose in his throat. He realized that part of his old life was truly gone. And in that moment, it hit him. The carefully constructed walls around his personal life were beginning to crumble. Tomorrow's meeting with Edward could be the first step in forging a new path, or it could tear open the wounds he'd tried so hard to ignore. The following day, Donald arrived at the Midtown Private Club with his usual confidence, shoulders back, tailored suit impeccable, a determined expression on his face. But beneath that polished veneer, tension simmered. Marbled floors gleamed under the subdued lighting of the lobby, and attendants in crisp uniforms offered quiet greetings. Ornate wood paneling gave the place a timeless feel. Donald advanced past the lobby, scanning discreetly for Edward Winters. He spotted Edward in a plush lounge area, seated on a leather armchair, reading something on his phone. At 52, Edward had an air of effortless sophistication, a slight touch of grey at his temples, a neatly trimmed beard, and a relaxed posture that hinted at a man comfortable with power. "Donald," Edward greeted, rising to extend a hand. "I'm pleased we're getting this chance to connect one-on-one." Donald shook his hand firmly. "Likewise." He noticed a fleeting curiosity in Edward's gaze, perhaps wondering if the previous encounter at Le Bernardin would affect this meeting. They made their way to a small, private dining room with tall windows offering a muted view of the city. Once seated, a server took their orders, and the two men exchanged polite remarks about the club's exclusivity and the general climate of the hospitality industry. When the server left, Edward cleared his throat. "I want to get right to it. This partnership could be a major game changer for both of us. Merging your boutique brand's flair with my global network has tremendous potential. You have an enviable reputation for personalized luxury, something the larger chains often struggle with." Donald nodded. "I agree. My hotels are successful, but operate primarily in select locations. Your network would catapult us into international markets. However, I'm concerned about maintaining the unique identity of Delacroix boutique hotels. I don't want to become just another faceless luxury chain." Edward set aside his folded napkin. "I respect that. And I'm open to ensuring you keep creative control, maybe a brand within a brand concept, where Delacroix remains distinct under our corporate umbrella. Full autonomy might not be feasible, but a high degree of independence is definitely on the table." Donald mulled over the suggestion. Normally, he would jump at this level of compromise from a bigger player, yet his mind also flicked to Christine. If the partnership moved forward, she would be in his periphery, Edward's fiancée. Could he handle that? Eventually, he tried to read Edward's expression, looking for any clue about Christine. But Edward's features remained professional, revealing nothing personal. Donald leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Brand autonomy is a starting point. I'd want joint marketing initiatives and a voice in any major development decisions." "Of course, you'd have input too," Edward nodded, smiling. "I see no issue there. In fact, collaboration could enhance your brand's uniqueness. I'm thinking about experiences that combine your boutique style with our broader customer base. We could bring in high-profile international clients looking for more intimate accommodations." Donald forced a polite smile, feeling the conversation flow like a well-choreographed dance. This should have been the highlight of his professional year, winning the attention and resources of a major hospitality mogul. Yet his thoughts drifted. When lunch arrived, they switched to lighter banter, discussing the restaurant's ambiance, the city's real estate market, and a few discreet jokes about the industry's stubborn bureaucracy. Edward exuded confidence, but wasn't overbearing, a quality Donald found both reassuring and disconcerting. He was used to tough negotiations, not cooperative synergy. At one point, Edward glanced at Donald, his tone shifting slightly. "I'd like to think that we can maintain a good working relationship despite any personal overlaps." Donald's heart kicked in his chest. "I'm sorry." Edward lifted a hand as if to diffuse tension. "I don't mean to pry, but you've met Christine." My fiancée. I'm aware you two have history. Donald remained silent, measuring his response carefully. We were married for a while. Yes, she told me. Edward's voice held neither judgment nor gloating. I hope this doesn't complicate things for you. Christine's her own person, with her own life. She respects your accomplishments and wishes you well. Donald mustered a neutral expression. I appreciate that. There was a quiet beat before Edward continued. Christine and I rarely discuss your past together, other than acknowledging it ended in a divorce. She cares a great deal about how you might feel about our engagement. I told her that's entirely between you and her to navigate. Donald's pulse throbbed at his temple. He searched for a calm tone. I'm glad she's happy. I truly am. Whatever happened between us is in the past. Edward studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. Understood. I just wanted to make sure we're not stepping onto a battlefield. I'd like us to move forward as business partners with no grudges. Donald swallowed, his throat feeling tight. No grudges, he agreed. They let that subject drop, returning to more typical business topics, yet the atmosphere had changed, more personal, more charged. Donald sensed that forging this partnership meant entering an unfamiliar world, one where his ex-wife could appear at corporate events, smiling on Edward's arm. As their lunch concluded, they shook hands, both men wearing business-like smiles. Donald walked out, feeling as though he had just signed up for an emotional tightrope walk. His old life and new ambitions were colliding in ways he hadn't anticipated, pushing him into territory he wasn't sure he was ready to explore. Over the next week, Donald tried to adjust to the reality of having Edward Winters in his professional circle. Emails, phone calls, and preliminary planning sessions blurred together. Each time Donald saw Edward's name flash across his screen, a pang of discomfort reminded him that beneath their polite collaboration lurked a personal landmine. Meanwhile, Patricia tried to be supportive. She asked about the progress of the deal, but carefully avoided mentioning Christine. Donald sensed her unspoken concerns and tried to reassure her with updates about branding strategies and marketing rollouts. Yet he knew a more profound conversation loomed, one that neither seemed ready to initiate. One afternoon, Donald found himself in a sleek conference room at Winters International, an enormous glass tower overlooking the East River. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave a panoramic view of the water, with sunlight glinting off nearby skyscrapers. He was there with a handful of his own senior staff, Mary Thompson included, to meet Edward's team and discuss integrating Delacroix boutique hotels into their existing global structure. Mary, whose calm demeanor usually stabilized Donald, sensed his unease the moment they entered the building. Deep breaths, she whispered, glancing sideways at him. Donald gave a faint nod, forcing a small smile. He reminded himself that his professional future was at stake, and he couldn't afford to let personal distractions derail him. In the conference room, Edward greeted them warmly, surrounded by key executives, marketing directors, financial analysts, and corporate lawyers. The agenda revolved around operational frameworks and synergy. For the first hour, they exchanged slides and bar graphs, discussing potential markets in Asia, Europe, and the American West Coast. Though Donald was typically commanding in such meetings, he found himself somewhat quieter than usual. It was Mary who stepped up, detailing how Delacroix's specialized training programs fostered a high level of customer service. Her voice was steady, her passion evident. Edward's team listened intently, taking notes and asking pointed questions. At a short break, Edward offered coffee to everyone, and then approached Donald. So far, so good. Your team's approach to personalized hospitality is unique. I can see why your hotels receive such rave reviews. Donald inclined his head. I've always focused on a personal touch, making guests feel at home. It's the boutique philosophy. Edward nodded. That's exactly what we need in our portfolio. Most of our properties cater to large conferences and massive tourism groups. We'd love to serve the more niche markets too, especially wealthy travelers seeking that special experience. Donald managed a genuine grin. At least the business aspect seemed promising. I think we can do something revolutionary, he said, hearing a touch of his old confidence resurface. Just then, an assistant stepped into the room, quietly handing Edward a note. Edward scanned it and offered Donald a polite smile. Forgive me. I'll need to step out for a moment. Let's pick up in 5. With that, Edward left. Donald leaned against the long conference table, scanning the cityscape outside. Mary appeared at his side. Looks like it's going well, she murmured. Donald shrugged. Yeah, on paper, everything's perfect, but it's strange. You mean Edward? Mary asked, ever perceptive. Donald sighed. Yes, working with my ex-wife's fiancé. It feels like stepping into an alternate reality. I keep expecting Christine to walk in any second. Mary placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. That must be complicated. Before Donald could respond, a middle-aged woman with a strict bob cut came over, introducing herself as Ingrid, Winters International's Chief of Legal Affairs. She launched into a brief discussion about contract provisions. Donald tried to focus, nodding at the appropriate moments. When the meeting reconvened, Edward returned looking composed. Apologies, just had to handle something personal. Donald wondered if something personal meant a call from Christine. The thought gnawed at him, but he forced himself to remain professional. They pushed through another hour of negotiations, finalizing outlines for the marketing launch that would announce their new collaboration. At the end of the session, the teams parted ways with cordial handshakes. As Donald and Mary stepped back into the elevator, she gave him a sideways glance. You survived, she teased gently, pressing the button for the lobby. He let out a slow breath. Yes, though I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I have to admit, Edward is, well, he's been nothing but courteous. It almost makes it worse. Mary nodded in sympathy. Sometimes it's easier to hate the person who replaces you, but you can't hate him, can you? Donald managed a small laugh. No, I guess not. As they reached the lobby, the open glass doors and bustling city street beyond reminded Donald that this was just the beginning. The synergy between his company and Winters International meant more meetings, more events, more chances to intersect with Christine. He would have to adapt, both for the sake of his business and for his own emotional well-being. Yet, a knot of unease twisted inside him. He had no roadmap for this situation, no blueprint for how to handle a collaboration overshadowed by personal history. He only knew that each step forward would take him deeper into unknown territory, forcing him to reconcile who he had been with, who he was becoming. Later that week, Donald found himself at the Manhattan headquarters of a philanthropic organization, the Daniels Foundation. He had been invited to speak about ethical leadership and community engagement, a topic he usually approached with mild cynicism, considering his own relentless business drive. Yet, Mary had urged him to accept. She believed it was a chance to broaden his perspective and meet people outside his usual corporate bubble. The event was held in a large conference hall, decorated with simple banners promoting community outreach projects. Rows of chairs faced a small stage, where a podium and microphone awaited the guest speakers. Donald spotted Mary in the audience, along with a few acquaintances from the hospitality industry. After an opening speech by the foundation's director, a charismatic older woman named Evelyn Daniels, Donald was introduced. He walked to the podium, adjusting his tie. Public speaking rarely unnerved him, but tonight he felt a peculiar tension. Maybe it was the memory of Christine's philanthropic aspirations. She had once talked about opening a shelter or starting a grant program. Clearing his throat, he began, "Good evening, everyone. My name is Donald Delacroix, and I run Delacroix Boutique Hotels here in New York. I was asked to speak about ethical leadership, but I'll be honest, my path to success hasn't always been as noble as I'd like." A ripple of attentive laughter passed through the audience. He continued, sharing anecdotes of his early struggles, his ambition, and the lessons he'd learned. He was careful not to overshare personal details, but he did touch on the importance of compassion in business. Surprisingly, he found himself voicing ideas he'd never verbalized before, recognizing that people, not just profit, kept a company alive. When he finished, the audience applauded politely. He left the stage feeling a strange mix of humility and pride. He had revealed more vulnerability than usual, but something about the setting made it feel right. During the reception that followed, a trio of people approached him. One was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a frank smile. "Mr. Delacroix, my name's Rose Clark," she said, extending a hand. That was a refreshing perspective, especially the part about reconciling ambition with empathy. Not every entrepreneur admits those conflicts. Donald shook her hand. "Rose, nice to meet you. I appreciate that." "It's a work in progress, I assure you." She was joined by two other attendees, a man named Grant, who managed a youth outreach program in Brooklyn, and a woman named Naomi, a local city council member deeply involved in community development. They struck up a conversation about how boutique hotels could partner with local charities to host fundraising events or offer job training programs. Mary hovered nearby, occasionally interjecting with helpful suggestions. "Our staff has volunteered before," she said, "but maybe we can make it a regular thing, tie it into the brand somehow, show that we're more than just luxury for the wealthy." Donald, usually hesitant about philanthropic branding, fearing it might come off as insincere, found himself nodding. "We could set up an ongoing initiative where guests can donate or even participate during their stay. We'd highlight local artists, local non-profits." "There's potential here," Grant chimed in enthusiastically, describing how teenage volunteers in his program might benefit from internships in hospitality. Rose offered to connect Donald with other community leaders who supported job placement for underrepresented youth. Donald felt a newfound spark of inspiration, even a sense of belonging. As the evening wore on, Donald realized these individuals weren't just potential charity contacts. They could be genuine allies. They weren't corporate powerhouses like Edward Winters. They cared about building meaningful relationships and improving the neighborhoods around them. It was a different kind of collaboration, one that might fulfill a part of Donald he hadn't known was hungry for fulfillment. After exchanging contact information, Donald excused himself to fetch another drink. Near the refreshment table, he found Mary smiling broadly at him. "Look at you, forging community bonds," she teased. "Feels good, doesn't it?" He shrugged, but couldn't hide a small grin. "It does. Actually, makes me wonder why I haven't done more of this in the past. Maybe I was too busy chasing expansion deals." Mary sipped her sparkling water. "It's never too late to broaden your impact, Donald. Not just in business, but in the lives of real people. You might find it's more rewarding than you'd expect." Donald considered her words. He had always measured success in financial terms, revenue, margins, growth. Now he sensed a different yardstick forming, one that could involve heart and soul. He thought of Christine again, remembering how she used to mention wanting to help others, and how he often dismissed her ideas as distractions. The memory pinched him with guilt. Yet as he looked around the hall, noticing the genuine enthusiasm among the attendees, he realized something significant. Perhaps building alliances with people like Rose, Grant, and Naomi might unlock parts of him he had kept locked away. His capacity for empathy, for genuine connection. For the first time in a long while, he felt a stirring of hope that his life could encompass more than high-stakes deals. That night, as the event wrapped up, Donald walked out with a handful of new contacts and an unspoken promise to himself. Maybe forging a better man within was just as important as forging a better business empire. One late afternoon, Donald arrived at his penthouse to find Patricia standing by the living room's picture window, arms crossed, her expression pensive. The sunset over the Hudson River painted the skyline in gold and lavender hues, a sight he normally found soothing. Tonight, tension hung in the air. He set his briefcase down. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone cautious. Patricia turned, her green eyes troubled. "I got a call from my mother this morning," she said, voice subdued. "She asked if there's any news about us, like an engagement yours, or at least moving in together." Donald felt a subtle tightening in his chest. "And what did you tell her?" She shrugged, forcing a sad smile. "I told her the truth. We haven't discussed anything concrete. But Donald, it's been a year. I'm not 21, and neither are you. How long are we going to keep it so undefined?" He inhaled, pushing down the impulse to get defensive. "I understand your frustration. It's just that things have been complicated," she finished for him. "You've been on edge since seeing Christine. I'm not accusing you of anything, but you barely talk to me about what's happening inside your head. I feel like an accessory in your life, Donald, not a partner." Her words stung, but he couldn't deny the kernel of truth. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Patricia, you knew when we started this that I'm not exactly the type to rush back into marriage. After my divorce, I needed space." She let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "Space, yes. But is that all you need? Or is there more you're not telling me?" He looked away, gazing at the colorful sunset. "Seeing Christine the other night stirred up old regrets about how I handled things in the past, my relentless push for success. It's made me question if I'm still that same man." Patricia approached him, her voice quieter now. "Do you still have feelings for her? Is that what this is about?" Donald exhaled. "Not in the way you might think. I'm not looking to get back together with her. She's moved on. I just can't ignore the fact that the life I chose might have come at the cost of my marriage, and seeing her so happy." He paused, searching for the right words. "It makes me wonder if I ever gave our relationship a real chance." Patricia's eyes softened briefly, as if she empathized, but then she squared her shoulders. "So where does that leave us?" He reached for her hand. "I care about you. That hasn't changed, but I'm still working through my own mess. I'm not saying I'll never get married again. I'm just not ready right now." Patricia pulled her hand away, tears threatening in her eyes. "Donald, I'm not asking for an instant proposal, but I do need to know that we have a future, a plan for something deeper than fancy dinners and weekend getaways. Otherwise, I'm just biding my time, hoping you'll one day decide I'm worth a commitment." The words cut him deeply. For a moment he stood silent, grappling with how to respond. Patricia's emotional plea spotlighted a truth he'd avoided. She wanted the solidity he once dismissed as a distraction. "Look," he began haltingly, "I'm trying to figure out who I am without being that man who sacrificed everything for career success. Maybe once I'm sure I'm not repeating old mistakes, I can give you what you deserve." Her expression flickered between hope and resignation. "Donald, I can't wait forever. I love you, but I won't lose myself chasing after your approval or your readiness." He stepped closer, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "I don't want you to lose yourself. If it means we take a step back or give each other some breathing room, I'll understand. But know this, I do value you. I'm just afraid of hurting you the way I hurt Christine." Tension coiled in the silence following his confession. Patricia's voice shook slightly when she replied, "I appreciate your honesty finally, but it doesn't solve our immediate problem. You need to decide if you even want a real partnership with me." He could only nod. "I know. Let me get my head straight. The new business deal is demanding, and my emotions are all over the place. We can talk more once I have clarity." She wiped at her eyes, stepping back. "All right, but don't think I'm going to stay quietly on the sidelines forever." The conversation ended on that precarious note, leaving them both emotionally raw. The setting sun painted the apartment in fading hues, as if mirroring the fragile hope that still flickered between them. Yet neither of them moved to close the distance. The rift was there, and it would take more than words to bridge it. As the last rays of daylight vanished, Donald found himself torn. He wanted to be the man Patricia deserved, but he feared stepping into a commitment he might mishandle all over again. A first real conflict had emerged between them, and he knew it wouldn't simply vanish with time. Whether he liked it or not, the pressure to resolve his inner turmoil was growing. A cold wind swept across Manhattan when Donald stepped out of his penthouse early that morning. The city streets bustled with their usual energy, but he moved through the throng without his customary sense of purpose. Since his heated conversation with Patricia, an invisible heaviness seemed to drape his life. He tried to shake off his doubts during his workout at the gym, pounding out stress on the treadmill. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw Christine's calm face at Le Bernardin, or recalled Patricia's teary gaze. It was as if those images refused to loosen their grip. Later, at his office, he gathered with a small group of managers to prepare for a corporate retreat he'd planned months ago. The retreat was intended to unify the leadership team, especially given the impending partnership with Edward Winters. Originally, Donald had envisioned a series of motivational workshops, lavish dinners, and scenic tours of a new property. Now, with his personal life in turmoil, the event felt like another test he wasn't sure he could pass. Mary Thompson arrived with a neat stack of paperwork. "The schedule's been finalized," she told Donald, placing the folder on the conference table. "We have team-building exercises in the morning, breakouts in the afternoon, then a formal dinner each night." Donald rubbed his temple. "Right, and I assume Edward and some of his key executives are still confirmed." Mary nodded. "Yes, they'll be joining us for the second day to discuss the synergy plan. A few potential investors will also attend, hoping to see how this collaboration might flourish." He flipped through the schedule, forcing himself to focus on practical details: lodging arrangements, speaker itineraries, budgets. Yet in the back of his mind, the personal stakes loomed. This retreat wouldn't just be about business connections. It would be a live demonstration of how well he could hold himself together around Edward, Christine's fiancé. As the day went on, Donald found himself immersed in countless tasks. He reviewed marketing strategies with the PR team and fielded calls from anxious investors. But even in the flurry of responsibilities, Christine's presence felt near, like a persistent echo in a large room. He remembered once promising her they'd take a weekend away to reconnect, one they never took. Now he was about to host an entire corporate getaway, ironically focusing on relationship building among staff and partners. Toward late afternoon, Mary carefully approached him again. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly, closing the conference room door behind her. Donald sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I've been better. It's tough to organize a feel-good corporate retreat when my personal life is a mess." Mary offered a sympathetic nod. "I'm here if you need someone to bounce ideas off of or vent. And I'm not just talking about the retreat." A faint smile tugged at Donald's lips. "Thank you. Right now, I'm trying to keep everything from collapsing at once." Her gaze softened. Sometimes you have to face the storm head-on, Donald. Avoiding it only makes it loom larger. I've seen you power through tough business crises before. But this is personal, and it's clearly weighing on you. Lean on us where you can. He appreciated her candor, though he wasn't sure he knew how to lean on anyone outside of a boardroom context. Still, the corporate retreat wasn't going anywhere. With or without the perfect emotional state, he had to show up, lead, and make sure it succeeded. By evening, he returned to the penthouse exhausted. Patricia had left a note saying she'd spend the night at her own apartment to give them both some breathing room. He stared at her elegant script for a long minute, a pang of guilt twisting in his stomach. The silence in the penthouse felt deeper than usual. He tried to distract himself by going over the final preparations for the retreat. He typed out an email summarizing the itinerary for all participants, triple-checking times, venues, and contact information. Edward had replied earlier, confirming his arrival and adding that Christine might join them for the closing ceremony if her schedule allowed. Donald froze momentarily at Christine's name. He had assumed she might stay away out of courtesy or discomfort, but the possibility of her appearance weighed on him. The retreat could turn into a crucible where every regret he carried about their marriage stood in stark relief. He saved his email and shut his laptop, leaning back in his chair. The city lights glowed through the penthouse windows, offering no answers. A wave of weariness washed over him. He felt the first real tremors of the tests to come. The retreat, meant as a triumphant unveiling of his alliance with Edward, now seemed like a gauntlet of emotional trials. Before turning in, Donald stared out at the shimmering skyline and allowed himself a single honest thought. He still wasn't sure who he needed to be, for Patricia, for his company, or for himself. That doubt clung to him as he headed to bed, casting a long shadow over the approaching days and the challenges they would surely bring. 2 mornings later, a small fleet of luxury SUVs transported Donald and Mary and a few other key staff members upstate to an exclusive resort property nestled by a tranquil lake. The crisp autumn air and changing leaves provided a picturesque setting for the retreat. As they drove, Donald gazed out the window, pondering how different this place was from the concrete canyons of Manhattan. Once at the resort, staff bustled to unload luggage and set up meeting rooms. The main lodge boasted rustic yet upscale decor, timber beams, stone fireplaces, plush furnishings. A large veranda overlooked the shimmering lake, and a forest of maples in vibrant red and gold formed a scenic backdrop. Mary quickly orchestrated the arrivals, directing people to their rooms and ensuring that welcome packets were distributed. Donald tried to put on a congenial face, greeting each new attendee with a polite handshake. Yet he felt a growing knot in his stomach, partly from anticipation of Edward's arrival and partly from the complicated personal revelations swirling in his mind. In the late morning, Donald led an introductory session in the lodge's main conference room. About 30 managers from his hotels, along with a few from Edward's organization, sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle. The session focused on leadership and empathy in a competitive industry. Donald spoke confidently about creating memorable guest experiences through genuine human connection. The words felt half true, as though he was still learning them himself. During a coffee break, Patricia appeared in the doorway. She had decided to come at Mary's urging, in part to showcase her design expertise for potential future hotel projects. Dressed in a tailored blouse and skirt, she radiated her usual poised elegance, but Donald noticed a certain reticence in her smile. He walked over, offering a small gesture of welcome. "I'm glad you could make it." She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Mary convinced me it'd be good for me to network here. Plus, she said you'd appreciate the support. But I can keep my distance if that's easier for you." Donald suppressed a sigh. "No, that's not what I want. Let's just See how the day goes. We can talk more privately later if you like." She nodded, giving him a brief, searching look before stepping away to join a conversation with a cluster of design-minded attendees. Donald stood there, realizing he felt an odd blend of relief and apprehension. Shortly after lunch, Edward arrived, accompanied by two top-level managers from his own chain of hotels. He greeted Donald with a firm handshake, his dark eyes reflecting confidence. "Beautiful place, Donald. I can see why you chose it." Donald offered a polite smile. "Thanks. I wanted somewhere away from the city's distractions." Edward's gaze lingered briefly on Patricia, who was speaking to another group nearby. Then he returned his attention to Donald. "We'll be ready to present our joint marketing strategy in the afternoon session." "I'm looking forward to seeing how our teams blend," Donald nodded. "Great. We'll have a more informal dinner tonight, and tomorrow morning there's a series of team-building activities. You're welcome to join, of course." Edward's posture remained relaxed, but his voice took on a gentler note. "Christine couldn't make it today. She's out of town on a charity project, but she might join us tomorrow for the closing remarks." "Is that all right?" Donald's stomach tightened. He kept his composure. "Absolutely. She's always welcome." Their conversation ended with cordial smiles, and both men went about their tasks. Still, Donald replayed Edward's mention of Christine in his mind. He couldn't help wondering if she would arrive at the worst possible moment, forcing him to confront the whirlwind of emotions he'd been trying to contain. That afternoon, a brief crisis erupted when the audio-visual system for the joint presentation failed. Stress levels soared as staff scrambled for a fix. Donald found himself in the middle of it, barking orders at technicians while Mary tried to calm him down. Eventually, the glitch was resolved, and Edward's team continued their presentation without further hitch. During the Q&A segment, Patricia asked a thoughtful question about integrating interior design concepts into global branding. Edward praised her insight, and Donald noticed how Patricia's face lit up at the recognition. It reminded him of just how talented she was, and how inattentive he might have been to her ambitions. By early evening, the group dispersed for a short break before the planned dinner. Donald retreated to his suite, where he finally allowed himself a moment of solitude. He splashed water on his face in the marble bathroom and stared at his reflection. The deeper conflict within him, that gnawing uncertainty about Christine, the unresolved tension with Patricia, and the weight of his own regrets clung to him like a shadow. He realized that no polished presentation or scenic retreat could blot out the truth. He was standing on a threshold between the man he had been and the man he could become. The question was whether he had the courage to face what lay on the other side. Night fell, bringing a shift from structured meetings to a more relaxed atmosphere. The lodge's main dining hall glowed with soft, warm lights. Wooden tables were adorned with flickering candles, and a crackling fireplace lent a cozy ambience. Staff circulated with trays of appetizers, while a gentle hum of conversation filled the air. Donald moved among the guests, exchanging polite words, trying to project the image of a gracious host, yet a persistent tension gnawed at him. Edward and Patricia stood together near the fireplace, engaged in animated discussion about design and brand identity. It was perfectly cordial, yet Donald couldn't fight a twinge of jealousy at how easily Edward seemed to connect with her. Mary introduced Donald to a few potential investors who had arrived that evening. He forced himself to focus on explaining the uniqueness of Delacroix boutique hotels, but every so often, his gaze drifted, searching for Edward and Patricia among the crowd. After dinner, a small jazz ensemble took the stage. Soft melodies floated through the hall, and people began to mingle in a more informal setting. Donald excused himself from a conversation and decided to step outside for fresh air. The night sky above the lake was clear, studded with stars, a contrast to Manhattan's perpetual glow. He found Patricia alone on the veranda, leaning against a wooden railing that overlooked the lake. "Hey," he said quietly, approaching her. She turned, her expression unreadable. "Hey, it's lovely out here. Makes me miss the simpler pace I had before moving to the city." Donald stood beside her, resting his hands on the railing. "Yeah, it's a nice break from the chaos." They were silent for a moment, listening to the distant murmur of jazz and the lapping water against the shore. Finally, Patricia sighed. "Edward told me Christine might come tomorrow." Donald tightened his grip on the railing. "He mentioned it to me too." Patricia studied his face. "Are you okay with that?" He attempted a brave nod. "I'll have to be. It's part of working with Edward. Christine is a piece of his life now." Patricia gazed out across the moonlit lake. "And what about you? You had a life with her once." "Seeing her, I can tell it rips open old wounds." Donald swallowed hard, recalling the guilt and longing that flooded him every time he thought about Christine's contented expression that night at the restaurant. "Yes," he admitted softly, "but I'm not looking to rekindle anything. It's just hard to see someone you once thought you'd spend your whole life with, moving on, fully at peace. Makes me question my choices." Patricia's voice trembled slightly. "And how do I fit into your questions? Do you question me too?" He turned to face her. The vulnerability in her eyes made his chest tighten. "No, I value what we have, but I'm aware I haven't given you the commitment you want. I'm sorry for that." She bit her lower lip. "Donald, I care about you enough to wait for some clarity, but not forever. This retreat is showing me just how far we've come in our careers and how little we've advanced in our personal lives." He reached out, gently placing a hand on her arm. "I need you to trust that I'm working through it." Before Patricia could reply, the door swung open behind them. An executive stuck his head out, calling for Donald. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation inside. Could use your input." Frowning, Donald excused himself. Patricia gave him a meaningful glance, as if to say they weren't done talking. He followed the man back into the dining hall, where he found Mary trying to calm two staff members in a heated dispute about the next day's itinerary. Edward stood nearby, looking concerned. The disagreement stemmed from a scheduling clash. Edward's team wanted an extended morning session, while Donald's staff needed that slot for another workshop. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a minor issue easily resolved with a bit of compromise. But tensions were high after a full day of negotiations. Voices rose, and Donald tried to insert himself diplomatically. Edward's marketing director insisted their presentation was critical, while Donald's operations manager argued it would disrupt carefully planned group activities. With the entire lodge watching, the conflict escalated. Over the next 15 minutes, Donald found himself in the middle of a confrontation that felt far more intense than it should have been. Accusations of disrespect were hurled back and forth. The entire notion of cooperation was unraveling in front of him. He felt a surge of frustration, recalling how he'd intended this retreat to prove unity and shared vision. Instead, the simmering tension, possibly fueled by personal undercurrents, burst into the open. Donald caught Edward's eye and saw a similar sense of dismay there. By the time calm was restored, the mood of the evening had soured. Attendees scattered, some heading to their rooms and others muttering about incompatibilities between the two corporate cultures. Donald stood in the nearly empty hall, shoulders tense. He realized that if this partnership was falling apart over a scheduling dispute, the deeper issues might be far more daunting. The next morning dawned with a cool mist drifting over the lake. Donald woke early, feeling the weight of last night's conflict. He dressed quickly and made his way to the lodge's main dining area, hoping to intercept any disgruntled staff before the day's sessions. The atmosphere was subdued, People sipped coffee quietly, eyes flicking around as though wary another argument might erupt. Edward was nowhere in sight, presumably meeting with his own team to salvage morale. Patricia appeared briefly, exchanged a polite nod with Donald, then joined a small table of designers. He noticed her glance at him, but made no immediate move to approach. By mid-morning, a team-building exercise commenced on the lawn behind the lodge. Simple tasks like guided trust walks and problem-solving games designed to break down barriers. Normally, Donald would have led them with confident energy, but today he felt overshadowed by the previous night's tension. Mary stepped in, her calm demeanor and soft-spoken leadership style coaxing reluctant participants into cooperating. An hour into the activities, Edward joined them. He offered Mary a cordial greeting and paused beside Donald, hands in his pockets. "I had a chat with my team," he said quietly. "Seems everyone's on edge. I suspect last night's blow-up was about more than just scheduling." Donald nodded, arms folded across his chest. "It's been brewing, I suppose. A clash of work styles, and maybe some personal baggage." Edward exhaled, watching two employees attempt to solve a puzzle that involved balancing a wooden beam. "I won't lie, I'm worried. If our teams can't even agree on a morning slot, how are we going to handle real issues like budget allocations and brand identity?" A chilly breeze rustled the leaves, and Donald felt it sting his face. He thought about all the resources and goodwill already invested in this potential merger. "We can't just let it fall apart," he said finally. "I believe in the synergy if we can hammer out the details. And if we can keep personal matters from poisoning the deal." Edward's gaze flickered. "Personal matters," he repeated, perhaps thinking the same thing Donald was. "Christine." Neither man said it, but the subtext hung thick in the air. Then, from across the lawn, they heard Mary's voice calling them over. She stood near a group of employees who had apparently hit a wall in one of the problem-solving games. The group included staff from both Delacroix boutique hotels and Winters International. They looked frustrated, each person talking over the other. Edward and Donald approached, and Mary turned, relief on her face. "We're stuck," she admitted, "and they could use a demonstration of unified leadership." Donald inhaled. For a moment, he recalled a memory from years ago. Christine encouraging him to take a more hands-on approach with his employees, to show them his human side. He had often brushed aside her advice, now though he recognized the value. "All right," he said, stepping into the circle. "We're going to figure this out, but we need everyone to listen and coordinate. Edward and I will participate too." The exercise involved moving each team member across a makeshift bridge of wooden planks without anyone falling off. It required trust, balanced pacing, and constant communication. Edward rolled up his sleeves, and Donald noticed a spark of determination in his eyes. At first, their group stumbled. Employees argued over who should lead and who should follow. One person stepped out of turn, sending a board tipping dangerously. There was some laughter, but also exasperation. After a couple of failed attempts, Donald and Edward intervened, calmly guiding them. Edward suggested a clearer role division, a couple of strategic spotters and a main leader to call out commands. Donald offered a method to pass boards along so nobody was left behind. Slowly, they shuffled forward, each person stepping carefully. When one plank wobbled, an employee from Edward's side quickly stabilized it, and a Delacroix staff member offered a hand in return. It took nearly half an hour, but eventually the entire group crossed the makeshift bridge with minimal mishaps. Cheers erupted. Edward clapped one of Donald's managers on the back, and Donald congratulated a Winters International associate for her quick thinking. In that moment, the tension from the previous night seemed to thaw. Mary grinned, relief evident. "Great job, everyone! Let's keep this spirit going." Donald exhaled, feeling a modest surge of optimism. It was a small victory, but a symbolic one. He and Edward exchanged a nod of mutual respect. As the team dispersed for a break, Edward lingered. That felt good. Maybe we can replicate this sense of collaboration in the next session. Let's hope, Donald replied. He glanced around, noticing Patricia standing at a distance, watching them. Her expression was soft, and for the first time in days, she looked almost hopeful. Donald gave her a slight smile, which she returned before turning to chat with one of the designers. It struck Donald that the group's success in that simple exercise mirrored his own dilemmas, bridging gaps, supporting one another, and trusting the process, even when fear or uncertainty threatened to tip them over. If they could do it here, maybe he could manage it in his personal life as well. By mid-afternoon, the retreat's energy had shifted in a positive direction. Conversations were more open, and laughter occasionally punctuated the lodge's corridors. People from both organizations seemed friendlier, albeit cautious. Donald could sense the fragile equilibrium, one that might shatter if confronted with too strong a force. The real challenge came in the form of the next scheduled session, a joint brainstorming workshop where teams had to propose innovative marketing campaigns for an upcoming holiday season. Donald stood at the front of the conference room preparing slides, while Edward and several department heads settled into their seats. At first, the workshop proceeded smoothly. Groups of 4 or 5 employees discussed ideas around social media outreach, specialty packages, and VIP experiences. Sticky notes and colorful markers littered the tables as participants scribbled fresh concepts. Mary circulated, offering gentle encouragement. Patricia listened intently to suggestions about decor themes that could distinguish the Delacroix brand in an international market. Then the session reached a pivotal moment. One of Edward's executives proposed a drastic rebranding that merged Delacroix boutique hotels under a single marketing banner with Winters International. Donald felt his pulse quicken as he glanced around to gauge his team's reaction. The suggestion included changes that would rename some of Donald's iconic properties. Mary looked alarmed. Donald's operations manager tensed visibly. Whispers spread. Donald cleared his throat and forced himself to maintain composure. "That's quite a bold proposition," he said carefully, trying not to let anger seep into his tone. Edward's executive, a brash woman named Fiona, pressed on. "We believe it could maximize global recognition. Delacroix would still be a sub-brand, but uniform signage and promotional materials would streamline costs and clarify the brand message." Donald's jaw tightened. He understood the financial logic, but knew it undermined a core principle of his boutique concept: individuality and unique identity at each location. He noticed Patricia's concerned expression from the corner of his eye, and Mary's subtle shake of the head. Edward stepped in, sensing the growing tension. "Let's remember we're just brainstorming here. No idea is off the table, but we're not committing to anything today." A hush fell, broken only by the shuffling of papers. Donald realized this was the moment to speak up or risk letting others define his brand. Gathering his resolve, he addressed the room. "I appreciate the creativity, but my hotels are known for their distinct character. Many of our loyal guests choose us precisely for the unique experience. A complete merger under one name might alienate them." Fiona opened her mouth to retort, but Edward held up a hand. "Donald has a fair point. We want synergy, not uniformity. I'm sure there's a middle ground." It was a diplomatic statement. Yet Donald couldn't escape the sense that this issue would resurface in formal negotiations. Still, he nodded in acknowledgement. "Yes, let's keep exploring while respecting the boutique identity. That's non-negotiable for me." The tension gradually eased, and the workshop continued with more tempered ideas: cross-promotional campaigns, loyalty programs, and seasonal events. By the end of the session, the air felt lighter, though a definite unease lingered beneath the surface. Donald recognized that the real confrontation was brewing just below the courtesy. During a short break, Patricia approached him with a gentle hand on his arm. "That looked like it could have gone south quickly. You handled it well." He exhaled, massaging the back of his neck. "I had to stand my ground. If I let them steamroll me now, what will stop them later?" Her eyes showed sympathy. "Still, compromise is tricky. Just be sure you know what you're willing to give and what you're not." Before Donald could respond, Edward emerged from the corner of the room. "Donald, can we talk for a moment?" They stepped aside into a quieter alcove near the windows. The view of the lake still shimmered in the afternoon sun, though the light was softer now, hinting at evening to come. Edward's expression was measured. "I realize how important your brand's individuality is to you. I don't want you to think we're trying to erase that. Fiona got ahead of herself." Donald pursed his lips, nodding. "I understand the financial rationale, but it's a core belief of mine to keep each hotel's identity intact." Edward clasped his hands. "We'll find a compromise. Look, we're in early stages. Let's not let one bold suggestion define the whole future." He paused, as though weighing something else. "Christine wanted me to pass along that she'll be arriving tonight. She asked me to let you know, in case it changes anything for you. She'd like to avoid making the atmosphere awkward." Donald tensed. He appreciated the heads up, yet felt the push of old emotions. "I appreciate it. Let her know I'm fine with it. She has every right to be here." Edward offered a respectful nod. "I'll tell her. We'll see how dinner goes. Let's hope we can focus on collaboration." They parted, each returning to the other participants. Yet Donald felt a swirl of tension at the news of Christine's imminent arrival. The workshop's brush with conflict over branding was only one piece of the puzzle. A deeper, more personal challenge awaited him, threatening to shake the fragile unity he was trying to hold together. He glanced around, noticing the subdued chatter among attendees. In a few hours, Christine would walk into this lodge, tying his past and his present into an uneasy knot. With everything else teetering on the edge, Donald braced himself for the possibility that the biggest test wasn't about merging hotel brands. It was about facing the love he once lost and the new relationships he might jeopardize if he couldn't keep his emotions in check. Night settled over the lodge as a few scattered stars broke through the light haze above the lake. In the main dining hall, staff set up long tables for dinner service, floral centerpieces adding a delicate warmth to the rustic ambiance. A soft mix of jazz and acoustic guitar played in the background, but Donald could barely register the music. He kept scanning the doors, half expecting Christine to appear at any moment. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions, curiosity, dread, and a faint flicker of anticipation. At the same time, he noticed Patricia wandering around the edges of the room, glancing at him from time to time. She seemed torn between giving him space and worrying about the effect Christine's arrival might have on him. When Christine finally walked in, Donald's pulse kicked. She wore a simple, elegant dress in a subtle shade of ivory, her light brown hair brushing her shoulders. Even at a glance, he sensed her quiet confidence. Edward slipped an arm around her, guiding her past the entryway. A subtle brightness lit her features when she saw the crowd, many of whom turned to greet her politely. Donald swallowed hard. Over a year had passed since he last saw her up close, certainly not in such a formal setting. She moved with the same calm grace that he remembered, but there was something new in her expression. Maybe it was the contentment he'd seen from across the restaurant that night. Gathering what composure he had, Donald stepped forward. "Christine," he said, voice subdued but steady, "I'm glad you could make it." She gave him a small, genuine smile. "Hello, Donald. It's been a while." He nodded, momentarily at a loss for words. "Edward, noticing the awkward tension, offered a casual handshake to Donald, then gestured for Christine to join him at a nearby table where a couple of Winter's international executives were seated. The momentary reunion ended as quickly as it began, leaving Donald wrestling with a torrent of memories. A few minutes later, he spotted Christine speaking with Patricia. He watched from across the room, uncertain whether to intercede. Despite the lull in the conversation around him, Donald felt as though the entire hall buzzed with unspoken questions. Was there any lingering animosity between Christine and Donald? How would Patricia handle meeting the woman Donald once built a life with? Eventually, Donald circled the hall, chatting with a few managers about the day's team-building activities. He forced a smile and tried to project an aura of professionalism. Every so often, he glimpsed Christine's laugh or Edward's hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Once, Donald caught Christine scanning the room until her gaze landed on him. Their eyes met, and she gave a subtle nod before turning back to her conversation. During dinner, people filed into their assigned seats. Mary, ever the peacemaker, had arranged the seating so Donald and Christine weren't at the same table. Patricia, however, ended up just across from Donald, while Edward and Christine were seated 2 tables away. The meal proceeded with polite small talk about menu choices, regional wines, and the day's events. Yet Donald found his focus drifting. Halfway through the main course, Patricia touched his hand lightly. "You're quiet," she murmured. "Are you all right?" He managed a short nod. "Fine. It's just strange, you know." Her expression softened. "I talked to her briefly. She seems genuine. She asked about me, about my design work." Donald felt a twinge of relief that they'd at least exchanged civil words, though the idea of them bonding unsettled him as well. "Thanks for telling me," he said, mustering a faint smile. As dinner wound down, people migrated to the lounge area or stepped outside onto the veranda for fresh air. With a little prodding from Mary, Donald joined a small cluster of attendees for a casual discussion about the retreat's progress. To his surprise, Christine drifted over after a few minutes. "Mind if I join?" she asked politely, glancing between Donald and Mary. Donald coughed into his fist, then nodded. "Of course." They formed a loose circle, standing near the large windows that overlooked the dark moonlit lake. Mary, sensing the delicate nature of this reunion, steered the conversation toward the successes of the day's workshops. Christine listened attentively, occasionally chiming in with remarks about how the group's sense of cooperation seemed stronger than expected, given the initial conflicts. Eventually, the others peeled away, drawn by the lure of dessert or the low murmur of quieter corners. Donald and Christine found themselves alone. She spoke first, her tone measured yet kind. "I'm glad to see you doing well," she said, her eyes reflecting genuine warmth. "Your hotels have such a distinct reputation now. I always believed you'd succeed, though I hoped it wouldn't cost you as much as it did." Donald winced inwardly at the reminder of their lost future. "I'm sorry about how it all ended. I know it's too late for apologies to fix what happened, but I do regret letting my ambition overshadow everything else." Christine nodded, a hint of sadness flickering across her face. "I'm not bitter, Donald. That anger faded a long time ago. I'm just at peace with it now. I hope someday you find your own peace too." He tried to summon a response, but his throat felt tight. Instead, he offered a tentative, grateful smile. She reached out briefly, giving his hand the gentlest squeeze before turning to walk away. Left standing by the window, Donald stared at the reflection of the moon on the lake's surface. Her words lingered. "I hope someday you find your own peace." He felt a sharp ache, yet also a strange sense of relief. Perhaps this was the confrontation he'd feared, the quiet realization that whatever might have been with Christine no longer existed, and she seemed genuinely content in her new life. He exhaled, chest heavy. Another chapter of his life was closing, yet so many questions remained unanswered. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Patricia waited for him to decide if he could truly open his heart again. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, a soft mist cloaking the grounds around the lodge. Despite the dreary weather, Donald felt oddly light when he woke. The short exchange with Christine lingered in his mind, a reminder of their shared past, but also a sign that she bore him no ill will. She had found her path, and now he had to forge his. He found himself at the breakfast buffet in the main dining hall, absently sipping black coffee. The swirl of attendees grabbing pastries and fruit provided a low background hum. Across the room, Patricia and Edward were talking in subdued tones, apparently reviewing the morning's schedule. Christine was nowhere in sight. Mary sidled up to Donald, carefully balancing a plate of scrambled eggs. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. He set his mug down. "Better than I expected. We actually spoke last night. It didn't end in harsh words, which is more than I could have hoped for." Mary offered a supportive nod. "So what's your plan now? Keep the partnership rolling?" Donald glanced around to ensure no one overheard. "I'm still on board, but we need to iron out some specifics. Fiona's push for a total rebrand was a red flag. And then there's the personal angle, which I can't fully ignore. But Christine said she wants me to find peace. Funny how it feels like permission to move on." Mary reached for the creamer. "Maybe that's exactly what you needed to hear." Not long after breakfast, the retreat sessions resumed. A joint meeting took place in one of the lodge's conference rooms, a final effort to merge ideas and finalize a statement about the future vision for both companies. Edward led the conversation with calm authority, while Donald contributed perspectives on preserving the boutique identity. Christine sat off to the side, quietly observing. Patricia also listened, occasionally taking notes about design ideas. By mid-morning, the drizzle intensified, drumming on the windows. The combined staff stood in small circles, comparing notes on marketing strategies and potential pilot programs. Donald circulated, answering questions and fielding concerns. He tried not to let his gaze wander toward Christine. She rarely spoke during these sessions, as she wasn't there in an official capacity, but her presence was noticeable, at least to him. Suddenly, a soft tone chimed on Donald's phone. A text message from Leonard Krauss, his attorney and longtime friend, lit up the screen. "Need an update on negotiations. Concerned about rumored rebrand issues. Call me ASAP." Donald slipped into a nearby hallway and dialed Leonard. A sense of trepidation flared. Rumors of rebranding might spook certain investors. The conversation was terse but clear. Leonard confirmed that word had leaked about Fiona's suggestion. Some shareholders were worried that a total merge under Winters International would dilute Delacroix's distinctive charm, one of the main draws for high-end clients. Donald paced the hallway, frustration building. "We're not doing a total merge," he assured Leonard. "But apparently, the rumor mill is spinning. I'll handle it." When he ended the call, Edward appeared, having stepped out to grab a bottle of water. He noticed Donald's tense posture. "Everything all right?" Donald hesitated but decided honesty was best. "We have a leak, or at least a rumor. Certain investors think we're losing our boutique identity." Edward frowned, worry flickering across his features. "I need to reassure my board too. Let's set the record straight this afternoon in front of everyone. We'll make it clear we value the Delacroix name and its distinct properties. That's non-negotiable." Relief trickled through Donald. "Thank you. Honestly, I was worried about pushback from your side." Edward shook his head. "Christine warned me, actually, that if we tried to devour your brand, we'd lose what made it special in the first place." At her mention, Donald stiffened slightly. Edward caught his reaction but said nothing, opting instead to extend a small olive branch. "I respect your brand's uniqueness. Let's collaborate, not absorb." Together, they re-entered the conference room. Edward asked for everyone's attention, and Donald stood beside him. With calm conviction, Edward explained that no final decisions about branding had been made and that Delacroix Boutique Hotels would retain its signature charm. Donald backed him up, addressing any concerns with a clear statement about preserving the brand's core values. The tension noticeably eased in the room. A few managers from Edward's side exchanged nods with Donald's staff, apparently accepting this compromise. Patricia flashed Donald a supportive smile, and even Christine, sitting quietly, offered him a subtle thumbs up from her corner. When the meeting adjourned, an air of cautious optimism filled the space. People dispersed to gather their belongings as the formal segment of the retreat was winding down. The real test, Donald realized, would come when they tried to implement these promises back in the city's frenetic environment. But at least for the moment, the weight of possible betrayal or overshadowing seemed to lift. Donald left the conference room, spotting Christine chatting with Mary. He lingered near the doorway, watching as Christine politely excused herself, stepping into the hallway. For a brief instant, she caught his eye, giving him an encouraging nod before continuing on. It struck Donald that they had reached a point of mutual respect, if not closure. He felt the tension in his muscles begin to unwind. Perhaps the storm he had feared so much had already come and gone, leaving only a gentle drizzle of unresolved questions. But for now, that felt like progress. Later that evening, the final dinner of the retreat brought everyone together in the lodge's banquet hall for a sense of closure, though not officially the end of the entire journey. Attendees mingled in loose circles, discussing the upcoming drive back to the city and which plans might solidify once they returned. The conversation buzzed with cautious optimism, overshadowed only by the knowledge that real work awaited them. Donald circulated among the guests, praising individual contributions to the brainstorming and thanking everyone for their patience. He noticed how staff members from both companies were chatting more freely, exchanging jokes and social media handles, as if the initial tension had dissolved into a more collaborative spirit. Around mid-dinner, Patricia made her way to Donald's side. He noticed a vulnerability in her expression, mixed with determination. "Could we talk alone?" she asked softly. He glanced around, noticing that many people were still deeply engaged in conversations. "Sure," he replied, placing his napkin on the table. "Let's step outside." They found an unoccupied spot on the rear veranda, where the gentle scent of pine and damp leaves greeted them. The mist from earlier had subsided, leaving the night air fresh. A faint glow from the lodge windows illuminated Patricia's features, revealing the flicker of concern in her green eyes. "You seem more at ease," she observed quietly, folding her arms around her torso as if against a chill. "Ever since you spoke to Christine, Donald leaned against the wooden railing. "I think I finally understand she's no longer my responsibility, nor my burden. She's not an enemy or a regret I have to keep punishing myself for. We each have our own paths now." Patricia nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. It's reassuring. But, Donald, I need to know, where do we stand?" A knot tightened in his chest. He reached for her hand, unsure if she would let him hold it. She did, albeit tentatively. "I care about you, Patricia. I can't claim I have all the answers, but seeing Christine happy and content makes me realize I don't want to miss out on building something genuine with you." She exhaled, her posture relaxing slightly. "I still need clarity about whether you can open yourself up truly. I'm not looking for a rushed engagement or anything like that, but I do need to know that we share a future, one where I'm more than just your companion at fancy events." Donald's grip on her hand tightened gently. I understand, and I want that too. Let me prove it in small steps, day by day, starting with letting you in on my decisions, not shutting you out. Because, honestly, the walls I built cost me my marriage before. I don't want to repeat that mistake. Patricia's eyes glistened. She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder for a moment. The tension between them seemed to soften. "All right," she whispered. "I can try that." Relief flooded him. They lingered there under the dim light, the hum of voices from inside distant but comforting. As the hush of the night enveloped them, Donald realized this was the first time in a while he truly felt hopeful about a relationship. When they returned to the banquet hall, Edward stood at a small podium, tapping gently on a wine glass to draw everyone's attention. Christine was beside him, along with Mary and a few other key figures. Edward cleared his throat, sporting a good-natured smile. "Before we wrap up this retreat, I'd like to say a few words. First, thank you all for your hard work. Coming together from two distinct organizations isn't easy, and I know tensions have run high at times. But what I've seen here in these last days is proof that we can do it, with mutual respect." A light murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Edward nodded at Donald, beckoning him to join. Donald stepped forward, standing next to Edward. "I'd just like to add my personal thanks," Donald began, meeting the eyes of his own staff. "It's no secret that I've fought fiercely to keep Delacroix boutique hotels unique. Working with Winters International doesn't mean losing that uniqueness. It means expanding our horizons, and I believe we can do that while honoring what makes us special." Applause rippled through the room. Mary beamed, Patricia sent an encouraging nod, and Christine offered a small, proud smile. The sight of her there, supporting Edward, while also seemingly at peace with Donald's path, was surreal but somehow soothing. When the speeches ended, Edward motioned for everyone to raise their glasses, to forging a future that benefits us all, and, hopefully, forging it together. Glasses clinked in a harmonious toast. Donald lifted his own, feeling the weight of the moment. Yes, conflict still simmered beneath the surface, financial details, brand identity, personal entanglements, but he sensed a collective resolve in the room, a willingness to find real solutions. As dinner wound to a close, Donald mingled easily with colleagues and potential investors. Occasionally, he caught Christine's eye across the room. Their glances were calm, almost friendly, as if acknowledging a shared history without resentment. For Donald, it was a powerful sensation, a kind of quiet healing, and beside him, Patricia seemed more relaxed. There was no immediate resolution, no grand gesture of proposal or promise. But a gentle understanding now bridged the gap between them. Donald couldn't predict the future, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to embrace it. By the following morning, most of the formal sessions had concluded. Luggage lined the corridors as attendees prepared to depart. Despite the earliness of the hour, the lodge buzzed with farewells and last-minute exchanges of contact information. A crisp autumn wind rattled the windows, hinting that change was in the air. Donald stood in the lobby, shaking hands with an investor who expressed interest in funding the expansion of Delacroix boutique hotels. Though the conversation was encouraging, Donald noticed his own shifting priorities. He wanted partnerships that respected his vision, not just any infusion of money. A year ago, he might have jumped at the offer. Now, he found himself asking more questions about the investor's values and long-term objectives. Once the investor left, Donald spotted Edward carrying an overnight bag and a stack of papers. They hadn't fully cemented their merger strategy yet, but at least the retreat had smoothed over initial friction. Donald approached him, offering a nod. "Heading back soon?" Donald asked. Edward set down the papers on a side table. "In a couple of hours." I have a quick meeting with some of my top executives first. How about you? I'll leave around midday, Donald replied. Patricia has some design clients she wants to connect with up here, so I agreed to stay a bit longer. Edward's expression remained cordial, but Donald could detect a thoughtful hesitation. Listen, about the final contract details, there's still quite a bit to iron out, especially regarding brand autonomy. Maybe we should set up a more private, in-depth meeting when we're back in the city. Donald nodded, recalling the rumors that had stirred anxiety among investors. Agreed. I'm not signing any documents until we have a firm agreement on preserving the boutique identity. Edward's gaze flicked briefly to where Christine stood near the entrance, conversing with Mary. I respect that. Honestly. Fiona's rebrand idea was well-intentioned, but misguided. A pause lingered between them, charged with the underlying recognition that their personal lives were woven into this business partnership. Finally, Edward cleared his throat. Christine and I will be attending a charity gala next weekend in Manhattan, one of those big fundraisers for arts education. Would you and Patricia like to come as our guests? It might be a good chance to show the industry that we can stand united. No awkward tension, just everyone moving forward. The invitation took Donald by surprise. A swirl of emotions rose within him. Part of him balked at the idea of socializing with his ex-wife and her fiancé in such a public setting, yet another part thought it might symbolize a new era. I'll talk to Patricia, he said slowly, but I appreciate the invite. It's generous of you. Edward offered a small smile. We need to demonstrate that we can work well together, and maybe Christine and I have our own reasons for wanting closure to the past. Let's see what the future can look like if we let it. They shook hands, an oddly sincere gesture. Then Edward excused himself, leaving Donald standing in the lobby with a cascade of thoughts. He pulled out his phone, scrolled past unread emails, and sent Patricia a quick text. Edward invited us to a charity gala next weekend. Let's talk when you're free. A minute later, she replied, Okay, I'm near the gift shop. Come find me. Donald maneuvered through departing guests until he reached the small gift shop tucked between the front desk and a side exit. Patricia was browsing postcards depicting the scenic lake in various seasons. She gave him a half smile. So, a gala with Edward and Christine, huh? She said, having already read his text. You think that's wise? He shrugged, stepping closer. Could be a public demonstration of unity for both companies and for us, personally, unless you're uncomfortable. Patricia's lips curved in a thoughtful line. It's not exactly my dream night out, she admitted, but maybe it's time we show we're not afraid of the past. If you feel up for it, I'll go. Donald exhaled, relieved at her willingness. Thanks. We'll talk more details later. As they exited the gift shop, they nearly bumped into Christine, who had just wrapped up her conversation with Mary. A moment of uncertainty passed across Christine's face. Oh, sorry, she said lightly. I was just heading out to the car. Donald steadied himself. Safe travels, Christine. And thank you for coming, she offered a warm, measured nod. It was good to see everyone working together. I'm hopeful about what this partnership can do, if handled carefully. Her gaze flicked to Patricia, who responded with a polite smile. And it was nice getting to know you too, Christine said kindly. Edward mentioned the charity gala next weekend. Maybe we'll catch up there. Patricia nodded, stepping just slightly closer to Donald. Yes, we're considering it, Christine nodded, a silent look of understanding passing between her and Donald. Then she excused herself, pushing open the lodge's front door. With that, she disappeared into the cool autumn air. Donald released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced at Patricia, who squeezed his hand. The lines between business and personal had never felt so blurred, yet at least they weren't fracturing under the tension. Soon, all that remained was to gather their bags and embark on the final journey back to Manhattan. But Donald knew the real culmination still awaited him, truly reconciling his old regrets with a future that included Patricia, a joint venture with Edward, and a renewed sense of purpose in his professional and personal life. A week later, Donald found himself in his penthouse once again, straightening his bow tie in the mirror. Outside, Manhattan's nighttime glow sparkled against the glass panes. Patricia stood nearby in an elegant navy gown, her blonde hair pinned in a low, stylish bun. She caught his eye in the reflection, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "You look nervous," she teased gently. He turned, letting out a soft chuckle, guilty as charged. "It's not every day I attend a gala with my ex-wife and her fiancé, who also happens to be my prospective business partner." Patricia stepped closer, adjusting a small crease in his jacket. "Just remember why we're doing this. It's a chance to show unity, and to prove to the industry and maybe to ourselves that we can move on from the past." Donald leaned in, pressing a light kiss to her temple. "Thank you for being here with me." Really. Soon, they were in the back of a sleek town car, navigating the busy streets to the charity gala's grand venue, a historic ballroom in Midtown known for its opulent chandeliers and gilded columns. The driver pulled up to a red carpet lined with photographers who snapped pictures of each guest stepping out. Donald escorted Patricia past the cameras, maintaining a cordial smile for the flashing bulbs. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with conversation. Lavish floral arrangements and soft lighting created an elegant setting, while a jazz quartet played on a raised platform. Waiters in tuxedos carried trays of champagne flutes. Edward spotted them first and approached with Christine on his arm. They were the picture of poise and harmony, Edward in a classic black tux, Christine in a deep green evening gown that complemented her light brown hair. The moment all four stood together, camera flashes intensified. "Well," Edward said, a polite grin curving his lips, "tonight is quite the spectacle." Donald nodded in agreement. "A bit more than your typical fundraiser, I'd say." Christine glanced around, noticing the curious stares from onlookers. "We might want to find a quieter corner if we actually plan on talking," she suggested gently. They relocated to a side alcove, away from the main bustle. A waiter offered champagne, which they all accepted. For a moment, an awkward silence threatened to settle, but Edward smoothly cut through it. "I spoke to my board today. They're on board with keeping the Delacroix identity intact, assuming we can finalize the specifics soon." Donald raised his glass. "I appreciate that. My attorney has hammered out some guidelines I'll email you. If we can stick to them, I think we'll be in good shape." Christine gave a soft smile. "That's good to hear. I know how important it is to keep your boutique charm. It's what made your hotels stand out in the first place." Donald felt Patricia's hand rest lightly on his forearm. He took it as a sign to speak from a place of honesty. "It was Christine, really, who encouraged me to think differently about guest experiences back when I first started. I wouldn't want to lose that ethos now." Christine's gaze flickered with mixed emotions, perhaps a brief acknowledgement of their shared history, then settled into an appreciative nod. "I'm glad you remember." They toasted gently, and Edward turned to Patricia. "And I've heard from various people that your design proposals were quite impressive. If this partnership goes through, we should talk about featuring your interiors in some of our upcoming properties." Patricia's eyes lit up. "I'd love that. Thank you for considering me." An event coordinator approached, beckoning Edward and Christine toward the front of the ballroom for a round of photographs. They excused themselves politely, leaving Donald and Patricia in the alcove. The swirl of glittering gowns and black ties formed a lively backdrop. Patricia let out a slow breath. That went surprisingly well. Donald nodded, scanning the room. Yes, but the night's not over. There's still a lot of talk about this collaboration. People are watching, waiting to see if the personal angle blows up in our faces. She gave him a reassuring squeeze on the arm. Let them watch. You seem more composed than ever. Before Donald could respond, a well-known industry journalist approached, greeting him with a warm handshake. Mr. Delacroix, is it true that you'll soon be merging with Winters International? Mind if I ask a few questions? Donald forced a gracious smile, stepping forward while Patricia stayed discreetly by his side. We're still in discussions, he answered. But we have high hopes for a future alliance that respects both brands. The journalist pressed on with a few follow-ups, probing the details of how much control Donald would retain and whether personal ties might complicate the arrangement. Donald addressed each inquiry with measured confidence, affirming that any partnership would be founded on mutual respect. Patricia interjected calmly when asked about her role, explaining her interior design background and how it complemented Delacroix's vision. When the journalist finally excused himself, Donald realized he felt a sense of triumph rather than dread. Instead of overshadowing him, the personal dimension seemed to humanize his brand. Observing the photographer snapping more pictures of Edward and Christine across the room, Donald marveled at how drastically things had shifted. He turned to Patricia, feeling a surge of gratitude. You were right. Maybe we can show that the past is behind us, and we're all moving forward, together. She slid her hand into his, a soft, hopeful look in her eyes. I believe we can, if you want it enough. He kissed her hand gently as the hum of the gala enveloped them. Crowds bustled, music played, and champagne sparkled beneath the grand chandeliers. This, Donald realized, was his ultimate test, being open and unafraid, merging past and present into a future that might actually hold real happiness. He spotted Christine smiling at him from a distance, a silent nod of encouragement. Then he turned back to Patricia, determined to embrace whatever came next. Donald stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse bathroom, adjusting the collar of a simple button-up shirt. Gone was his usual crisp suit and tie. Today, he had decided on a more casual look. It felt oddly refreshing to let his guard down, even in small ways. Sunlight spilled into the adjacent bedroom through the open curtains, revealing a bright Manhattan morning. He had returned from the gala with a sense of renewed purpose, feeling the pressure of merging past mistakes with present desires. Yet with that sense of renewal came a vulnerability he wasn't used to. Patricia had stayed over the night before, and he heard her now in the kitchen, humming lightly as she made coffee. When he walked out to join her, she greeted him with a warm smile. "Morning," she said, passing him a mug. "I was starting to think you'd decided to stay in bed all day." He took a sip, savoring the gentle sweetness she'd added. "I guess I needed a slower start," he admitted. "It's been a whirlwind ever since the gala and everything that led up to it," Patricia nodded, leaning against the counter. "Any updates about the deal with Edward?" He set down his mug, considering how much had shifted in the past weeks. "Leonard and I hammered out a preliminary contract. If all goes well, I'll sign it next month." He paused, tapping the side of the mug thoughtfully. "It's strange how quickly it's happening, though part of me is relieved we're not dragging it on forever." Patricia offered a supportive nod. "And how are you feeling about Christine?" Donald exhaled softly, noticing how Patricia's posture tensed just a bit. "I'm okay," he said, careful to make eye contact. "I thought seeing her with Edward would be impossible to handle, but now I actually feel lighter. I accept that we're different people, and I want her to be happy. Honestly, I'm more concerned about building something real with you." She smiled, a hint of relief in her expression. "So am I." A chime sounded from Donald's phone, drawing his attention. He glanced at the screen. It was an unexpected text from his younger brother, Mark, a schoolteacher in Boston. "Mom's not doing great. Could you make time to come see her?" Donald stiffened, a pang of guilt radiating through him. He hadn't visited his mother in months. Their relationship had never been exactly warm, but after his father's passing, Donald had fallen further out of touch. "It's my brother," he explained to Patricia. "Our mother's health. She lives in Connecticut, you know, and it sounds like she's taken a turn for the worse." Patricia rested a hand on his forearm. "You should go," she said gently. His mind raced with an internal debate. He had crucial meetings lined up with Edward's team, plus the rollout for the new design concepts. "I do need to go," he conceded. "Work can wait. I'll ask Mary to step in for me as needed. I can't keep putting off personal responsibilities." Patricia offered a small smile. "I'll come with you if you want. Or if you need time alone with your family, I understand." He set down his coffee, feeling a surge of gratitude for her understanding. "I'd appreciate you being there, but let me see how serious things are. If it's just a routine check, I don't want to drag you away from your clients. For now, I'll go by myself." Within 2 hours, Donald was on the road in a hired car, bound for the small Connecticut town where he grew up. The city skyline receded in the rearview mirror as the driver navigated toward greener landscapes. Donald stared out at the passing scenes of suburbs and winding roads. Memories of his childhood surfaced unbidden. A modest house, a stern father who believed in discipline, a mother who tried to keep the peace. Mark greeted him at the entrance of the tidy retirement home where their mother now lived. The building was clean and well-maintained, but still carried an air of quiet finality. "Good to see you, Don," Mark said, though his voice held a note of tension. "Let's go inside." They walked down a corridor lined with pastel-colored walls and cheerful paintings. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. When they arrived at their mother's room, Donald paused, taking a breath. The last time he visited, she'd seemed frail, yet still able to hold a decent conversation. Now, as he stepped in, he saw a marked difference. She lay in bed, eyes half closed, her thinning hair brushed neatly aside. A nurse stood nearby, checking vitals. The nurse gave them a polite nod and slipped out quietly. Their mother opened her eyes. "Mark," she called softly, then blinked. "Donald, you're here." Donald mustered a gentle smile, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "Yes, Mum, I'm here." He noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for his. An overwhelming mix of remorse and affection welled up in him. How many moments had he missed with her while chasing success in Manhattan? She coughed lightly, studying him with a gaze that held recognition and fatigue. "So busy, my boy," she whispered, "but I'm glad to see you." Donald swallowed the lump in his throat. "I know, Mom. I've been away too long." A soft hush settled in the room, punctuated only by the hum of medical equipment. He sat there, acutely aware of the fragility in her every breath. This was a different kind of confrontation, one that had nothing to do with business deals or ex-wives. It was a reminder that real life, with all its heartbreaks and joys, waited beyond the boardrooms and penthouses. He squeezed her hand gently. Whether she had minutes, days, or years left, he realized he needed to make space for these human connections. Glancing at Mark, who watched with a mix of relief and caution, Donald understood that building a better version of himself wasn't just about forging business partnerships or finding a new love. It was also about mending these family bonds he'd nearly let slip away. 2 days later, Donald returned to Manhattan feeling both drained and oddly uplifted. His mother's health scare had turned out to be more serious than expected, but not immediately life-threatening. He arranged for a specialized home care nurse to check on her regularly, and Mark promised to keep him updated. Leaning back in the back seat of a black sedan, Donald gazed at the familiar skyline that once symbolized pure ambition. Somehow, it no longer looked like a trophy waiting to be claimed. It felt more like a backdrop to a life he was still learning to balance. When he finally reached his penthouse, Patricia was there to greet him. She wore a worried expression, arms folded protectively as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "How's your mom?" she asked as soon as he walked through the door. He set down his overnight bag, shrugging out of his coat. "Stable now. She needs ongoing care, but Mark and I will handle it together. It's hard seeing her like that, but at least I got to be there." She seemed comforted. Patricia approached, wrapping her arms around him in a gentle hug. "I'm so sorry you're going through that. If there's anything I can do—" He held her close for a moment, letting the warmth of her concern calm his frayed nerves. "Just being here helps," he murmured. After a brief pause, he pulled away, meeting her gaze. "I realized something while I was in Connecticut. We keep talking about life balance and how I've neglected personal relationships for so long. Seeing my mother like that brought it all home." She nodded, giving his hand a supportive squeeze. "Sometimes it takes a jolt like that to refocus on what matters." They moved to the sofa, where Donald recounted more details. The neat rows of potted plants his mother kept on her windowsill, Mark's frustration at Donald's long absence, the nurse's gentle care. Patricia listened intently, occasionally brushing a strand of hair from her face, her green eyes reflecting empathy. When he finished, the penthouse was quiet. She took a breath. "I'm proud of you for stepping up and handling it. I know it wasn't easy." Donald exhaled. "It wasn't, but it felt right. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, you can't keep compartmentalizing life forever." A soft chime interrupted them. A call from Mary. Donald answered on speaker. "Hey Mary, I'm back in the city." Her voice crackled through the phone. "Welcome back. I just wanted to let you know Edward is organizing a press conference next week to announce the final stages of your partnership. Seems they want to make a formal statement, possibly bringing you up to speak. Are you ready for that?" Donald exchanged a glance with Patricia. "Yes, I think so. Let's confirm the date and time, and I'll coordinate with Leonard." Mary sensed the weight in his tone. "Got it. And how are you doing otherwise?" He softened. "I'm okay, thanks. A lot's changing, but I'll manage." They said their goodbyes. Patricia turned to Donald, a questioning look in her eyes. "A press conference. That's going to be big. Are you sure you're ready to handle a major public announcement on top of everything else?" He nodded, though the prospect sent a ripple of anxiety through him. "I need to show confidence, especially to our investors. This partnership is going to define Delacroix hotels for the next decade." He paused, then added, "But maybe I can do it differently than I used to. More transparency, more acknowledgement that business isn't my only priority." Patricia smiled. "You've definitely changed, Donald. Even the way you talk about work is different, less about you, more about the people involved." He felt a warm surge of gratitude at her observation. "I still have a ways to go," he admitted, "but maybe I'm finally on the right track." Over the next few days, Donald split his time between the office and occasional calls to his mother. He arranged a rotating schedule with Mark, so neither would be solely responsible. It felt strangely comforting to reconnect with his brother. They hadn't worked together on anything since they were teenagers. Patricia watched these changes with cautious optimism, throwing herself into new design projects for a couple of high-end boutiques. Occasionally, she offered Donald advice on how to create a warmer, more approachable atmosphere in his hotels. For once, he didn't dismiss her suggestions. He even took notes. He also exchanged a series of professional emails with Edward and Christine, Christine, though not officially part of the negotiation team, sent Donald an encouraging message about the press conference, reminding him to project genuine warmth. The gesture surprised him, but it felt in line with the peaceful dynamic they'd managed to establish. As the day of the press conference drew nearer, Donald felt the usual nerves that accompanied major public events. Yet there was a difference, a deeper sense of purpose. The old Donald might have seen this solely as a chance to boast about profits and expansions. Now, he wanted to highlight the collaboration between two entities, each with its own identity, merging to create something greater than the sum of its parts. One evening, as he and Patricia walked through Central Park, enjoying a mild breeze, he told her exactly that. "I've come to see synergy as more than just a buzzword. It's about compromise, respect, and learning from each other. If I can apply that same principle in my personal life, maybe I won't lose what's important again." Patricia smiled softly, winding her arm through his. "I think you're well on your way." Under the canopy of swaying branches, Donald felt a gentle hope take root. A hope that returning to the everyday world, with all its demands and routines, didn't mean going back to who he used to be. Donald arrived at the press conference venue, a grand event space in Midtown, feeling an undercurrent of nerves. Banners displaying the logos of Delacroix boutique hotels and Winters International graced the entrance. A dais and microphone stood at the far side of the expansive hall, where rows of chairs were set up for journalists and industry guests. People milled about, checking their phones, scribbling notes, or greeting acquaintances. Photographers snapped pictures of arriving executives. Edward lingered near a small crowd, shaking hands. Christine stood close by, wearing a businesslike but elegant suit, quietly helping Edward organize his talking points. Donald spotted Mary near the stage, going over last-minute details with the AV technician. Patricia hovered close to her, scanning the layout. When she saw Donald, she hurried over, her eyes reflecting encouragement. "You're going to do great," she whispered. He inhaled deeply. "Thanks." A staff member beckoned him, gesturing that it was time to begin. Edward opened the press conference with poised remarks about the future of the hospitality industry. He spoke confidently of synergy, of offering guests an elevated travel experience. Then came Donald's turn. He stepped up to the microphone, scanning the sea of expectant faces, reporters, investors, curious onlookers. Clearing his throat, he began, "Thank you all for being here today. It's no secret that Delacroix Boutique Hotels has a distinct place in the market. When Edward Winters first approached me about a partnership, I was skeptical about preserving our identity, but I'm here to tell you that we've found a way to combine our strengths while respecting what makes each brand unique." A flurry of camera flashes erupted. He adjusted his stance, recalling Christine's advice to speak with sincerity. "I've spent years building my company from the ground up, focusing on personal touches, local craftsmanship, and intimate guest experiences. Now, we're aligning with Winters International to take that vision worldwide, not by losing our character, but by bringing it to more places and people." He paused, letting the words sink in. His gaze flicked to Patricia. She watched with a proud, patient smile, reminding him that his personal growth had fueled this new perspective. A journalist stood. "Mr. Delacroix, can you confirm reports that your hotels will retain their names and individual designs?" Donald nodded. "Absolutely. Each hotel will keep its signature. We'll share resources and marketing, but guests who love the Delacroix charm will still find it intact." The journalist scribbled notes, satisfied. Another voice from the audience asked about the timeline and whether rebranding would occur. Donald explained that select signage might bear both logos, but the boutique flair would remain, ensuring loyal customers felt at home. Edward then stepped up, standing beside Donald. We believe this collaboration can raise the bar for hospitality. Delacroix has shown that big doesn't need to mean impersonal. By supporting each other's strengths, we can craft luxury experiences that are innovative and authentic. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked in quick succession. Christine, standing just behind Edward, offered a subtle thumbs up to both men, and Mary beamed. After more Q&A, the press conference wound down. People began dispersing, some heading for refreshments, others seeking interviews. Donald shook the hands of a few key reporters, ensuring they understood the partnership's core values. When he finally stepped away, Patricia was there to greet him. "That was perfect," she said, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Not too showy, just honest and clear." He let out a breath. "I felt more comfortable than I expected." And seeing the reactions, I think we've put those rumors of a complete takeover to rest. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Christine approaching, Edward in tow. Christine smiled warmly, addressing Patricia. "Your design proposals were a hit with the marketing team. They can't stop talking about your concept sketches." Patricia lit up. "I'm thrilled to hear that. I'd love to collaborate further with them when the time comes." Edward nodded, shifting his attention to Donald. "We made a strong statement today. I believe the industry sees us as partners who respect each other's space, and that's exactly what we intended." Donald agreed, his posture relaxing. "Now the real work begins, though, turning our promises into reality." Edward's expression turned earnest. "I'm confident we can manage it, as long as we keep lines of communication open." Glancing at Christine, Donald felt a hint of bittersweet gratitude. There was no lingering tension in her eyes, only encouragement. He recognized that her unwavering serenity had, in its own way, guided him toward finding balance. Soon, the group dispersed. People congratulated Donald and Edward, while others began packing up camera gear. A short while later, Donald found himself stepping outside the venue into the bustling midtown streets. The city roared around him, taxis, pedestrians, bright billboards. He inhaled the crisp air, realizing that just a few weeks earlier, he might have tackled this day with a tunnel vision focus on business outcomes alone. But now, he sensed a broader perspective shaping his actions. For all his success, he was learning that genuine relationships, both personal and professional, could flourish when nurtured with respect, and that true growth required sharing what he'd learned, not burying it beneath contracts and profit margins. Patricia looped her arm through his as they began walking, leaving the venue behind. Donald felt a comforting weight lift from his shoulders. The transformation was subtle yet profound. He no longer carried the burden of old regrets in quite the same way. A crisp autumn breeze swept down Fifth Avenue as Donald exited the lobby of one of his boutique hotels. He paused for a moment, letting the swirl of golden leaves dance around his feet. Inside, the staff he had just met with were invigorated about upcoming renovations. Patricia's design ideas would soon breathe new life into the lobby and suite floors. He stepped to the curb, raising a hand for a cab. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark with a photo of their mother holding a cup of tea, looking brighter than she had in weeks. Donald smiled, texting back a quick response of gratitude. The taxi arrived, and Donald slid in, giving the driver his home address, yet on a sudden impulse, he changed his mind. "Actually, can you take me to Central Park near the Bethesda Terrace?" The driver nodded, changing course. Donald stared out the window, reflecting on how the city felt slightly different to him now, less like a battleground, and more like a place where he could find meaning if he looked for it. Once at the park, he wandered along the paths, eventually finding the iconic terrace area overlooking the lake. The architecture and gentle bustle of tourists provided a serene atmosphere. He strolled past a violinist playing a gentle tune, tossing a few bills into the open instrument case in appreciation. Approaching the railing near the fountain, Donald paused. The water shimmered under the late afternoon light, ducks gliding on the surface. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. "Donald!" He turned, surprised to see Mary standing there, a latte in hand. "Mary," he said, smiling, "what brings you here?" She shrugged. "I sometimes come here to clear my head. Big city, big decisions, you know. What about you?" Donald glanced at the peaceful scene. "I guess I needed some fresh air and time to think. A lot's happened lately." They meandered along the stone walkway, Mary sipping her latte. Eventually, she asked, "How's your mother doing?" A wave of gratitude washed over him at her genuine concern. "Better than I feared. She's stable, and the new nurse is fantastic. Mark keeps me in the loop, and I'm visiting more often now." Mary nodded, relief evident in her eyes. "That's wonderful. I'm sure it means a lot to her." Donald placed his hands on the cool stone ledge overlooking the water. "I've been thinking about all the second chances I've been given, with my mother, Patricia, even Christine. Maybe this partnership with Edward is another second chance, this time for my company to grow without losing its soul." Mary smiled, setting down her latte on the ledge. "You've come a long way, Donald, and it's not just about the business or the relationship drama. It's about you choosing to be different." He nodded. "I can't erase the mistakes I made, but maybe I can keep learning from them." "That's all I can really ask for." His phone buzzed, showing an incoming call from Leonard. Donald excused himself briefly, answering with a concise greeting. Leonard's voice crackled through the line. He'd finalized a draft of the contract. Edward was reviewing it, and both parties could sign by next week. When Donald ended the call, Mary studied his expression. "Good news." He nodded. "Contract's nearly done. I guess I'll be making an official announcement to our employees soon. You'll help me plan that, I hope." She chuckled. "Always." They chatted for a few more minutes, discussing minor staffing issues and the next round of property updates. Then Mary excused herself, heading toward the park's exit. Donald watched her go, reflecting on how her steady presence had influenced him more than she probably knew. Left alone, Donald let his gaze wander over the lake again. A soft gust of wind carried the smell of damp leaves. He remembered sitting in these same park benches years ago, fixated on how to expand his empire, hardly noticing the families strolling by, the lovers sitting hand in hand, or the artists sketching the skyline. Now he noticed them, the laughter of a toddler chasing a pigeon, the gentle murmur of a young couple comparing tourist maps, an older gentleman reading a newspaper by a statue. These simple moments seemed to ground Donald in a way that lavish deals and fancy dinners never had. He lingered there until the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Finally, he pulled out his phone and sent Patricia a text. "Central Park near Bethesda. Thinking about how much I appreciate you. Let's meet for dinner tonight." After hitting send, he walked slowly toward the park entrance, heart feeling lighter yet resolute. The phone vibrated, a reply from Patricia. "That sounds perfect. Pick me up in an hour." Donald slipped the device back into his pocket, a quiet smile lifting his features. He couldn't predict every twist of fate ahead. No deal guaranteed perpetual bliss. No single gesture fixed all regrets. But he was moving forward, step by step, into a future he was finally ready to embrace with open eyes and an open heart. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.